Chapter 286. For the next few days, regardless of whether Tan Tan was walking, eating or talking, he maintained this expression of extreme shock. Every now and then, he would shout, "Wah! Master!" This led to Meng Chao Ran's constant bouts of "Wah! Master!" These three words would immediately cause him to have a headache, a splitting headache. Eventually, Meng Chao Ran finished walking this part of the Ice Mirror Mountain. He was about to heave a sigh of relief when he discovered that Tan Tan was still making a big fuss like this. Meng Chao Ran was miserable beyond words. Even the divine chi-gathering fish in Tan Tan's arms floated on the surface of the fish tank with its white belly facing upwards. Meng Chao Ran really couldn't stand this guy's narcissism and shamelessness. Just as they walked out of the Ice Mirror Mountain, they heard the sounds of battle. Meng Chao Ran's experience was plentiful. The first thing he did was to cover Tan Tan's mouth, and then quietly approach. Just as they turned the corner, a green-clothed young lady was engaged in a fierce battle with a strange three-headed serpent. The young lady's right hand held a sparkling longsword, while her left hand held a sparkling dagger. Her battle style was extremely valiant. She was actually going head-to-head with the three-headed serpent. When Meng Chao Ran and Tan Tan arrived, the battle was already nearing its end. Three-headed black-boned serpent! Meng Chao Ran immediately recognized it. This was a type of spirit beast from the Tsunglan battlefront. Even though it was only a third-grade spirit beast, the serpent's essence core from the three heads of the black-boned serpent was a rare medicinal ingredient. Looking at this young lady, she seemed to be very experienced in dealing with the black-boned serpent. She was actually able to injure the serpent. As Tan Tan watched, his mouth unconsciously turned into an O shape. This time, he didn't do it intentionally. He was shocked. This young lady looks about the same age as me. How is she so powerful? What Tan Tan didn't know was that with his current cultivation level, even if he were to face the black-boned serpent alone, there would be no danger. Master, this young lady is really beautiful. Tan Tan turned his head in shock and looked at his master in a daze. She's really strong. I like it. Look at her big breasts and round buttocks. Meng Chao Ran was speechless. Meng Chao Ran really couldn't see any part of this girl that was beautiful apart from her big breasts and round buttocks that Tan Tan had mentioned. She was just an ordinary person. However, Tan Tan was right about one thing. It's really powerful. Looking at this battle, this kind of valiance, even a normal burly man would find it hard to use such a method. This young girl actually used it without even blinking her eyes. As he fought, his saliva splattered all over the place. Evil creature! Why aren't you kneeling down for me? To voluntarily offer up his head. Damn it! How despicable! There is indeed a kind of violent beauty. Meng Chao Ran murmured. However, she didn't hear her disciple's reply. She turned her head and saw that Tan Tan was staring at the young girl with his mouth wide open. He seemed to be lost in thought. Poor Tan Tan, he fell in love at first sight. Could it be? Meng Chao Ran was shocked. In the blink of an eye, the three-headed black-boned serpent seemed to know that it would not be able to escape this calamity. With a sudden roar, it slammed its tail against the ground and shot out viciously towards the young lady. It was actually a mutually destructive attack. Ah! The young lady screamed and cursed. Your grandmother! You stinking snake! You're actually shameless. Let me tell you, you've successfully angered me. With a loud bang, one person and one serpent collided. The three-headed black-boned serpent's three heads simultaneously opened their mouths and viciously bit down. Not good. Meng Chao Ran didn't manage to hold him back and Tan Tan had already rushed out in a hurry. Beauty. I'm here to save you, haha. Regarding the hero saving the beauty, Tan Tan had heard Chu Yang mention it before. As long as the hero saves the beauty would be moved by the hero and secretly give her heart to him. After that, both parties would worry about each other, and she would give her heart to him. After that, it would become a story that would last for eternity. Such a beautiful thing, Tan Tan had always dreamed of it. Today, he finally had such an opportunity. Furthermore, the target was the girl he fell in love with at first sight. How could Tan Tan not run as fast as he could? The young lady originally had a way to deal with the serpent. Just as the serpent pounced on her, her dagger flew out from her hand and pierced deeply into the throat of one of the serpent heads. At the same time, her long sword also pierced through the other serpent's mouth. Fresh blood splattered everywhere. She reached into her bosom and pulled out a dagger to deal with the last serpent head. However, she suddenly heard Tan Tan's shout. One had to admit, the power of Tan Tan's voice was extremely great. This kind of broken gong sound was mixed with the howls of a male duck and a female wolf. When the young lady heard it, she was immediately startled into a state of confusion. Her hand that was pulling out the dagger slowed by a sliver, and she was actually tightly coiled around by the three-headed black-boned serpent. Where did this bastard come from? What are you shouting for? The young lady cried out in grief and indignation. With her remaining hand, she used all her might to prop up the serpent head that was about to fall. The three-headed black-boned serpent had suffered 2 fatal injuries and was on the verge of death. However, it still went berserk and wanted to bite this young lady to death. The serpent's mouth hissed as it breathed out a fishy stench. At this moment, Tan Tan arrived just in time. One slash. With a swoosh, he cleanly chopped off one of the dead serpent heads. It should be this one. The young lady almost vomited blood. Is he an idiot? Can't he see that this is the most dangerous one? Oh! Tan Tan responded. With a loud roar, he slashed out again. The light from the blade was like a waterfall. Another dead serpent head was chopped off. Fuck! The young lady was driven mad and actually burst out with a manly phrase. She gnashed her teeth and spat out. This one, you pig! There has to be an order! Tan Tan raged. What are you shouting for? Tan Tan thought to himself. This woman really doesn't know what's good for her. This handsome brother is here to save you and you actually dare to call me a pig. Thinking of this, he almost gave up on saving her. This was the first time Tan Tan encountered a three-headed black-boned serpent. How would he know that the other 2 heads were already dead? He only saw that the young lady was using her hand to support one of the serpents. The remaining 2 were too dangerous, hence he chopped them off first. The young lady struggled to support the remaining serpent head and was about to heave a sigh of relief. From her point of view, after this guy finished chopping off the other 2 serpent heads, shouldn't he at least chop off this one? However, she did not expect that after holding on for a while, there was still no movement. Feeling that she could no longer hold on, she furiously turned her head to look. All she saw was this little guy standing by the side happily. Seeing the young lady struggling to turn her head to look at him, this little guy excitedly shouted, "Do your best! Do your best!" This was the most infuriating thing in the world. Ugh! The young lady, who was already unable to hold on, fainted from anger. Before she fainted, her only thought was, I definitely wasn't bitten to death by the three-headed black-boned serpent, nor was I poisoned to death. I was angered to death by this hateful bastard who can't do anything right. If there's a next life, if I don't torture him to death, my surname isn't Xie. As the young lady fainted, her hand lost strength and the serpent head fell to the ground. Tan Tan then realized. Fuck, so this is what she was talking about. He hastily leaped forward and screamed. Swoosh! With a swing of his blade, the remaining serpent head was chopped off by Tan Tan. Taking advantage of the momentum, he kicked it away. Hurry up and save her! Meng Chao Ran shouted. Oh oh oh! Tan Tan repeatedly agreed. With all his might, he moved the serpent body away from the young lady. This serpent was as thick as a thigh. Tan Tan moved it while drooling. Tisk tsk, so fat. Not sure if he was referring to her or the serpent's fat, the young lady woke up. The cool breeze on her head immediately woke her up. I'm not dead? Of course you're not dead. I'm here to save you. A strange voice spoke. The young lady turned her head and saw a shocked face looking at her. Eh? It seems to be a different person from the guy with crooked eyebrows and slanted eyes. The young lady jumped up and fiercely said, Where's that bastard from just now? Shocked. Tan was shocked and asked, "What bastard?" "That bastard who killed the serpent." The young lady stomped her feet. Her eyes searched around. "Where's the bastard?" Tan was shocked and asked. "Is he gone?" the young lady asked. "No." Tan was shocked and said. "Then where is he?" The young lady was somewhat puzzled. "We're just talking normally. Why do you have to put on such a shocked face?" "He's here." Tan was still shocked and inexplicably said, "I'm him." "Oh." The young lady's throat emitted a strange sound. She stared at him with her eyes wide open. "What are you looking at?" Tan was shocked and asked. "It's clearly not you." The young lady frowned. "It's me." Tan was still shocked and said, "Young lady, I saved you." "It's really me." The young lady somewhat collapsed and said helplessly, "You saved me? Why are you shocked?" Tan was inexplicably shocked and said, "Young lady, don't you think I'm particularly handsome? Where's the serpent?" The young lady was defeated and changed the topic. At this moment, she was distracted by the mysterious expression on his face. She actually forgot to be angry. "Over there," Tan said. "I helped you vent your anger just now." "Ah." The young lady finally saw the 3 snake heads that had been smashed into pieces. Yes. It's me." Tan was shocked and said, "It's just a stinky snake. It actually dared to hurt you. I smashed it. I smashed all 3 of its heads." "Oh my God! Oh my God!" The young lady beat the ground in grief and indignation. Kill me! What kind of monster did I meet? It's just a snake." "Young lady, don't make a fuss. Although it has 3 heads, it's still a snake. It's not a dog." Tan explained in shock. "I'll kill you, ah!" The young lady jumped up and pounced on Tan like a tigress. Her 2 hands firmly grabbed his neck and violently shook him back and forth. "You pig! Pig! You smashed the snake heads! You smashed the snake heads! Then why did I spend so much effort to kill the snake?" Chapter 287. "You bastard!" The young girl's anger surged like a mountain. "I killed this snake for its nucleus! I'm so angry!" "Nucleus?" Tan was at a loss. "The snakes here are like apples and jujubes. They have nuclei?" Meng Chao Ran was almost choking. He finally came up to mediate. The young girl saw that there were outsiders present, so she angrily let go of Tan. She ran forward to check the 3 snake heads that had already turned into meat paste. She looked around, but found nothing. She sat down on the ground and wanted to cry but had no tears. "My nucleus, miss, what is your name?" Tan touched his nose and walked over. He seemed to feel that he had done something wrong. "Ahem, I saved you." "Miss, can this be considered as a hero saving a beauty?" "Hero saving a beauty?" The young girl looked at him with teary eyes. Her brain was not thinking straight. "You call this a hero saving a beauty? You call this shameless? You are not beautiful enough." "Yes," Tan said proudly. He forgot to maintain a shocked expression and said, "My senior brother said that if a hero saves a beauty, the beauty will repay him with her body. From then on, you 2 love each other. It will become a beautiful story for all eternity. Repay with her body?" The young girl stammered. She looked at this guy. She did not expect that this bastard would not only ruin her plan, but also smash the nucleus. He made her work in vain. Finally, he had the cheek to ask her to repay him with her body? Where did he get such thick skin? "Yes. Repay with your body," Tan said as if it was a matter of course. "I am a hero and you are a beauty. I saved you. Shouldn't you repay me with your body? Besides, my martial arts are high. Your chest is big. I am handsome and your butt is round. You are a perfect match." Tan said until here and suddenly realized something. He hurriedly gathered his emotions. Then, he suddenly said with shock, "Wow! Do you think that such a handsome person like me, is not worthy of you? He raised his eyebrows in shock as he said this. Ugh! The young girl rolled her eyes and fainted again. This time, I have met my nemesis, Meng Qiaoran mediated, and the two sides finally sat face to face in a calm and peaceful manner. Tan Tan was somewhat indignant. I saved the damsel in distress. But she didn't repay me with her body? The girl was also indignant. This guy was simply a lunatic. With Meng Qiaoran's superb conversational skills, he used the spring wind and rain to gently and quietly ask the girl. Unknowingly, Meng Qiaoran's amiable smile coaxed out all her information. Cough. It wasn't easy for Meng Qiaoran either. In order to get information about the woman his disciple fell in love with at first sight, he didn't hesitate to use his beauty to trick her. Xia Dan Feng belonged to the Xia clan. She was the younger sister of the young clan lord Xia Dan Qiong. Moreover, the Xia clan had focused on nurturing her. He had the potential of a genius. Although she wasn't very good-looking, she had everything that ordinary women had. Moreover, it was definitely several sizes bigger. It was just that her face was a little plain, but she was still a beauty. However, this flaw could be made up for with that extremely impressive and hot body. In fact, it was even better than that. Although the relationship between the two of them wasn't very good, Meng Qiaoran had 10,000% confidence in his disciple's divine skill of pestering and beating. Moreover, he also had a super invincible divine skill of being thick-skinned and narcissistic. Meng Qiaoran believed that it wouldn't be difficult for his disciple to deal with this girl. Well, the only problem was this girl's family. However, he didn't need to worry about this for the time being. He would deal with her first. As for the other matters, he would let Chu Yang worry about them when the time came. Meng Qiaoran thought irresponsibly. Everyone was heading towards the Tsanglan battlefront. And it was said that Xia Dan Feng had come out this time because she had been scolded by Xia Dan Qiong. This was simply a heaven-sent opportunity. Therefore, Meng Qiaoran deliberately walked far in front of them all the way, and sometimes he would hang far behind them to create opportunities for the two of them. Therefore, whenever the two of them got together, they would become extremely fiery. They would fight every day, several times a day. Fortunately, Tan Tan had improved very quickly. He was actually on par with Xia Dan Feng, a genius who had been promoted by the clan with countless elixirs. At first, he was at a disadvantage, but after a few fights, he began to attack and defend. After fighting for another 3 days, Tan Tan actually had the upper hand in all aspects. Moreover, Tan Tan had a great advantage or merit. After seeing this, Meng Qiaoran realized that he had always underestimated this brother of his. This guy didn't have any tender feelings for the fairer sex. This made Meng Qiaoran, as his master, worried and admired him at the same time. Therefore, along the way, he often saw Tan Tan throwing Xia Dan Feng to the ground, and then riding on top of her to beat her up. Apart from not hitting her face, there was nothing else that was forbidden. Chest, buttocks, thighs, wherever he could get his hands on, he would hit. Bang, 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 bang. It was like hitting a sandbag. It was very satisfying. And Xia Dan Feng was struggling under Tan Tan's body. She was cursing while being beaten. The most amazing thing was that Xia Dan Feng didn't cry after being beaten. Instead, she would think of ways to hit back. And she wouldn't give up until she achieved her goal. This character was really good. Therefore, this kind of scene could be seen almost everywhere along the way. Meng Qiaoran's goal of using battles to temper Tan Tan was almost half completed before they even entered the Tsanglan battlefront. This was all thanks to Xia Dan Feng, even though it was full of Xia Dan Feng's grievances and tears. When they encountered spirit beasts, both of them would fight to be the first to rush up. This was because Xia Dan Feng's important mission was to obtain the pelts and cores of spirit beasts. On the other hand, Tan Tan wanted to hone his martial skills, and on the other hand, he wanted to rely on this to make a fortune. The cores that both of them obtained were clearly separated, and each of them kept his own. Well water didn't interfere with river water. Tan Tan would never deliberately give them to Xia Dan Qiong to curry favor. These were mine. Why should I give them to you? You haven't promised to give yourself to me. Tan Tan's reason was very good. This was very different from the situation of an ordinary man pursuing a woman. And Xia Dan Cheong would never accept Tan Tan's gift. This is yours. Why should you give it to me? You're not my husband. Both of them were money grubbers to a certain extent, but they were very principled. Moreover, they were very principled. This point made the corners of Meng Chaoran's mouth twitch. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. In the end, it was unknown who brought up the topic. Let's bet. Gambling. Every time they fought, there would be a wager. The loser would hand over the wager, and become the winner. The wager was usually one or several spirit beast cores. It could be imagined that Tan Tan had only lost a few times. But eldest young lady Xia had lost in grief and indignation. Therefore, the spirit beast's inner cores that she had painstakingly hunted for a long time had almost all entered Tan Tan's pocket. Tan Tan's pocket only went in, but not out. This drove Miss Xia crazy. She also worked harder and harder to obtain the cores of spirit beasts. Then, she would come back to fight with Tan Tan after getting the wager. Then, she would lose, and then fight again, and so on. Following these two crazy people, Meng Chaoran really didn't know whether he should cry or laugh. Forget it. Anyway, they came out to gain experience. Just let them be. Therefore, this strange combination of three people quarreled and fought all the way to Tsanglan battlefront. While the lower three heavens was in chaos, the lower three heavens was also filled with murderous aura. Diwu Qingrou's purge was still ongoing. However, Minister Chu, who had facilitated all of this, was currently fishing on the Lotus Lake. He was having a carefree and unrestrained day. The Lotus Lake wasn't very big, but it wasn't small either. It had a radius of several hundred miles. In this inland area, it could be said to be a very big lake. The winter had just passed. Although the frost had begun to thaw, the grass on the ground had only a few small sprouts. This was precisely the time when the wind blew on the face of the willows. The Lotus Lake was still withered. The lotuses that were frozen on the surface of the lake during the winter were now floating like pieces of rags. There wasn't the slightest bit of the magnificent scenery of the lotus flowers in the summer. Minister Chu's white robe was whiter than snow. He was holding a thin fishing rod. He was sitting on a small boat that was not much bigger than his butt. He was floating on the surface of the water. He was floating like duckweed. It was like a white cloud floating on the surface of the dark green water. The fishing line on the fishing rod was moving. Suddenly, it was pulled taut and made whooshing sounds. Suddenly, it curled up and floated on the surface of the water. It turned out that a fish had taken the bait. Moreover, this fish was not small. The strange thing was that the fish had taken the bait, but Minister Chu didn't pull back the rod. He could only let the small boat float around under the surface of the water with all his might. This is so satisfying. Minister Chu held the fishing rod and felt the pulling force under the water. He was very relaxed and happy. Is the joy of fishing really in the fish? No, no, no. Is it the process of fishing? No, no, no. It's just the moment when the fish takes the bait. It's that heart-palpitating excitement and pleasure. Right now, I'm still enjoying this pleasure. Minister Chu looked up to the sky and sighed. Awesome! Pfft. Someone laughed. Not far from him, there was a slightly bigger boat. On it, there was a little girl wearing a brocade jacket. She was also holding a fishing rod. One of her hands was supporting her chin as she fished. The girl's expression was somewhat bored. At this moment, when she heard Minister Chu's fallacy, she couldn't help but laugh. She shouted, "Hey! Bookworm, did you catch a fish?" Minister Chu's face darkened. He said unhappily, "The ancients said that men and women should not touch each other. The ancients said that women should strictly abide by the ways of women and not show their teeth when they smile. The ancients also said that men and women should not talk casually when they meet. The ancients also said, 'You should call me this Duke, not this Bookworm.'" "Ha ha!" The girl grinned, revealing a pair of sharp canine teeth. She rubbed her belly and said, "Ayaya, you're really a sour scholar." You're talking about the ancients, 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 the ancients. I'm dizzy. Chapter 288. Not a scholar? The girl was even more amused. Then you are a high scholar? No. Grand scholar? No. Top scholar? Even more no. Then what exactly are you? I'm still a commoner. I'm ashamed. Minister Chu's face revealed a look of shame. It seemed as if he was deeply ashamed. Waha! The girl laughed so hard that she almost fell into the water. She turned her head and shouted, Miss, this bookworm is so funny. I am just teasing you. The girl inside said softly. Her voice was very magnetic and very powerful. It could be said that this voice was a man's voice, but it could also be said that it was a woman's voice. Sex. Chu Yang had already noticed this strange master and servant pair for the past few days. This girl seemed to have never shown her face. Only the little girl was busying herself. But Chu Yang had been on the Lotus Lake for a few days, and they had also been floating on the lake for a few days. They had seen each other almost every day. This made Chu Yang feel a little strange. I came here to find the Sword of Calamity. You came here. What are you here for? There was not even a single water plant on the lake. If you said you came here to see the scenery, I would not believe it. Chu Yang came here for 2 reasons. First, to understand the soft power of water. Second, there was a very important reason. The 3rd fragment of the Sword of Calamity was in the Lotus Lake. Chu Yang had planted a spy in the House of Exceptional Beauties to confuse Di Wuqing Ro. But the most important reason was to get the 3rd fragment of the Sword of Calamity in the Lotus Lake. Because the 3 masters' meeting was in the Lotus Lake. Chu Yang was now checking the spot. He was floating here and there to let the sword tip and sword edge in his dantian feel where the 3rd fragment was. But until now, even after a few days, he didn't feel anything at all. Chu Yang's memory could not be wrong. But in this situation, he could only explain it to himself. It was not time yet. Following the voice, the curtains on the small boat were lifted, and a figure walked out in large strides. He stepped on the small boat, causing it to sway. The young maidservant cried out in alarm and almost fell into the water. Sir, can you come on the boat for a chat? The one who spoke was the voice from before. Or rather that miss. However, even though this young lady was on a boat, she walked out with a majestic gait, as though she was a mountain peak. Chu Yang glanced over, and couldn't help but exclaim in his heart, My goodness! He originally thought that since she was a miss, even if she wasn't beautiful, she should at least be graceful and slender with a delicate figure. However, the miss that appeared in front of him made his jaw drop. She was 7 feet tall, with leopard-like eyebrows, round eyes, broad shoulders, and a thick back. She had the back of a tiger and the waist of a bear. Just by standing there, he naturally exuded the aura of a domineering hero. If it were a man. Chu Yang's face remained expressionless, but his stomach began to churn. If it weren't for the fact that she didn't have a beard, if it weren't for the fact that she didn't have an Adam's apple, if it weren't for her perky breasts and perky buttocks, if it weren't for the fact that she was wearing a dress, Chu Yang would definitely think that this was a man. Moreover, he was a burly man. Sir, please come over for a chat. The young lady frowned, and suddenly, an aura of anger appeared. Okay. Chu Yang replied. He swung the fishing rod, and the big fish below dragged him over. Chu Yang had a premonition that this woman was not a simple character. You didn't throw up the boat. How did the boat move? The young girl's pretty eyes widened as she asked in astonishment. I was dragged over by the fish. Chu Yang winked and smiled. Bullshit! The young girl pouted. Hee. Chu Yang had already arrived in front of her, and casually handed the fishing rod over. Take it, enjoy it. The young girl pouted, and took the fishing rod full of distrust. She even said, Who would believe you? Ah! Suddenly she screamed, and her body tilted. With a splash, she fell into the water. Caught off guard, she was pulled down by the big fish, and water splashed everywhere. However, she immediately floated up on the surface of the water. She wiped the water droplets off her face and shouted, "Wow! So I was really pulled by a fish. And such a big fish. Wow, don't run!" The last few words were said to the fish. Then, the young girl climbed onto the boat, and with the fishing rod in her hand, she started to compete with the big fish in the water. Chu Yang raised his eyebrows. This maid knows martial arts, and she is not weak. "Sir, please come in. Don't bother with this crazy girl." The tall and sturdy young lady smiled and stretched out her hand. "Thank you." Chu Yang smiled and walked in. There was a small table in the cabin. On the table, there was a big teapot and a big cup. It was very thick. "May I ask your surname?" Chu Yang asked. "My surname is Huyen." The young lady took out a big teacup and poured tea for Chu Yang. She sat down opposite him and smiled. "My name is Huyen Aoba. So it is Miss Huyen." Chu Yang's heart skipped a beat. Another person from the Three Heavens clan. Didn't the people from the Three Heavens all go back? Why is this girl still here? "What is your surname?" The girl Huyen Aoba smiled faintly. "My surname is Chu." "So it is Duke Chu." Huyen Aoba smiled gently. "May I ask if Duke Chu is from the Three Heavens? Or from the Three Heavens?" As she spoke, she stared into Chu Yang's eyes and said, "Duke Chu, please don't say that you are a scholar who is not even an elementary scholar. If you do, I will look down on you." Chu Yang suddenly realized that this girl was difficult to deal with. She was difficult to deal with, not because she was unreasonable, but because she was calm and wise. This was difficult to deal with because she was full of wisdom. In front of her, it was difficult to tell a lie without being seen through. "I am not from the Three Heavens, nor the Three Heavens." Chu Yang smiled faintly. "Oh, King of Hell Chu?" Huyen Aoba raised her head and looked at him with her bright and sharp eyes. Like a hawk. This pair of eyes should be on the face of a man of high status. Chu Yang thought. He smiled and said, "Miss, why would you make such a ridiculous deduction? King of Hell Chu. Isn't that too comical?" "Ha ha." Huyen Aoba smiled calmly and said, "Perhaps you don't know this, but you are able to control a big fish underwater with a single thread. How can an ordinary person do that? Or you can say that you have a fishing line to guide the fish, but the fishing line can only prevent the fish from escaping, but it cannot control the direction of the fish. This is the first reason." "Oh?" Chu Yang became interested. "Second, I have seen many of the dukes of the Three Heavens. The outstanding people that I have not seen are not like you. Third, I heard that 2 dukes of Chu came from the Three Heavens. Later, Diwu Qingro investigated and confirmed that he was the king of acting. However, when he mobilized a large force to capture them, he discovered that they had already disappeared without a trace." Huyen Aoba said confidently. "In the Three Heavens, if you were in the Great Jiao, you would have been taken in by Diwu Qingro. Now that Great Jiao is in chaos, you are not worried at all. This means that you are not from Great Jiao." She smiled. "There are many young men of Great Jiao who see this chaos and sigh, but this does not prove that I am Chu Yan's wife. Miss, don't you think this is too far-fetched?" Chu Yang was not flustered. "It cannot be proven. But I can be sure." The woman suddenly smiled and said, "I believe that even if you are not King of Hell Chu, you should be one of the Dukes of Chu. Also, I believe that you are King of Hell Chu. Even if you are not, I still believe that you are domineering." Chu Yang rarely saw this kind of temperament in a woman, but this woman in front of him clearly showed this kind of domineering aura in her soft words. "Then I really have no other way." Chu Yang smiled bitterly. What could he do if the other party said so? This woman had completely merged the willfulness of a woman with a domineering aura that only men could have. If he continued to deny it, he would become a joke. He might as well not admit nor deny it. He would just muddle through it. Chu Yang's sensitive senses told him that this woman did not have the slightest bit of enmity towards him. On the contrary, she admired him. Moreover, it was a sharp kind of appreciation. It was the appreciation of meeting a worthy opponent. Duke Chu, do you know Gao Xing? Huyan Aobo smiled calmly and said, Gao Xing? Even if Chu Yang did not know before, he would definitely know after coming to the prefecture. The first successor of the Gao clan of the lower three heavens. He came to the lower three heavens for some unknown reason and helped Di Wuqing for some unknown reason. In a short 1 or 2 years, he used the power of his hands to make great contributions to Di Wuqing. Gao Xing. Yes, Gao Xing. Huyan Aobo said as if she was talking about a stranger. I am Gao Xing's fiancé. The reason why Gao Xing is not in the lower three heavens and came to the lower three heavens is to escape from marriage. Escape from marriage, cough, cough, cough. Chu Zhang choked and nodded repeatedly. Cough, cough. I understand. Huyan Aobo looked at him with some anger. What do you understand? I understand your feelings, Chu Zhang said solemnly. The feeling of someone running away from marriage is too uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. I don't feel uncomfortable at all. Even though she knew that Chu Yang did not mean what he said, Huyan Aobo did not expose him. I already knew that Gao Xing ran away from marriage. However, I am also curious about this person. That's why I came to see him. Oh? See him? Chu Yang asked. Yes, just to see. Huyan Aobo smiled proudly and said, Even though I am not good looking, I want to see what this man who ran away from marriage looks like. Is he worthy of me? Oh? Chu Yang was a little confused. Chapter 289. Wow! Chu Yang was sweating. I suddenly felt sad for the enemy Gao Xing. To be played by a woman to this extent, he can be considered unique. Do you want to know the many things I learned from him about Di Wuqing? Including many secrets? Huyan Aobo blinked her eyes. Many things about Di Wuqing? Chu Yang looked at her inquiringly. After thinking for a long time, he finally said resolutely, Yes. You finally admitted that you are King of Hell Chu. Huyan Aobo looked at him with a smile. King of Hell or Qing, they are all mortals. Chu Zhang said philosophically. For half a month, I was here, and you were here. I observed you for half a month, and you also studied me for half a month. You called me up today, definitely not just to confirm my identity. Of course. Huyan Aobo laughed coldly. May I ask your true intentions? It's very simple. Huyan Aobo raised her head and said quietly, Gao Xing, running away from marriage is a fact. But in the upper three heavens, he can be considered a relatively famous rising star. Firstly, I was curious. Secondly, it's easy for a woman to dress up as a man, so I sneaked in to see this person. After several months of observation, I finally came to a conclusion. Huyan Aobo smiled lightly with a hint of disdain. Gao Xing is a talent. He has brains, means, and great potential for martial arts development. If that's the case, why? Such a person, if he didn't run away from marriage, I would have just married him and let it go. After all, compared to Ao Xie Yun, Gu Du Xing, Xie Dan Qiong, Mo Tian Yun, Mo Tian Ji, O Du Xiao Dong Wu Shang and the others, although he is somewhat lacking. Compared to the majority of the heirs, Gao Xing can already be considered outstanding. It can't be considered as an insult to me. Lacking compared to the top, but more than enough compared to the bottom. This is Gao Xing. Huyan Aobo said lightly. Chu Yang frowned fiercely. He was a little shocked. This Miss Huyan's tone is really big, and her eyesight is really accurate. The influential people in the upper three heavens, she almost casually included most of them. Just like several families. Moreover, many of them were not famous at all. However, she had clearly discovered the potential of these people. Only Duo Qianhao and Mo Tianyun were left out. But then again, if Mo Tianyun didn't die in the hands of Mo Tianji and grew up, who could be sure that his achievements would be lower than these people? However, since he ran away from the marriage, he must pay the price. Although I'm not interested in him at all. A masculine smile appeared on Huyan Aobo's face as she said, "So now, Gao Xing is no longer worthy of me. If you don't like this marriage, just say it." No one would shamelessly pester him. Why did he have to sneak away? How can a man be so irresponsible? Huyan Aobo said in disdain. "Eldest miss, there are many things that you can't do as you please," Chu Yang said lightly. "Can Gao Xing make his own decisions? As for you, if Gao Xing didn't run away from the marriage, with your own strength, would you be able to completely break up this marriage? This is an alliance of interests between two great clans. But how can it be resolved by personal feelings?" Although Chu Yang didn't know Gao Xing and had never met him before, he still had to express his own opinion on this matter. Because he could already see that this Huyan Aobo was definitely a woman who clearly knew what she loved and hated. And her love and hate were very strong. Today, she told him some secret information, but if she regretted it in the future. Chu Yang felt that her methods might not be much better than dealing with Gao Xing now, therefore, Chu Yang's words weren't an explanation but a nail in the coffin. "If anything happens in the future, you can't blame me." "Yes, that's what I meant. With our own strength, we can't do it. But if I dare to say it, would he dare to?" Huyan Aobo looked at Chu Yang meaningfully and said with a smile, "I didn't expect Minister Chu to be so meticulous and think of Gao Xing's difficulties. Preparing for a rainy day, just in case. In front of such a smart person, lying would make one look stupid. What a good preparing for a rainy day." Huyan Aobo praised and said, "Then you should know why I'm looking for you today. Please tell me." Chu Yang smiled, not anxious or impatient. "If you don't say it yourself, I'll pretend I didn't hear it." Huyan Aobo looked at him deeply for a long time before she laughed and said, "King of Hell Chu, you are indeed King of Hell Chu. Minister Chu's actions have made me even more wary of the heroes of this world. You flatter me." Huyan Aobo pondered for a while and finally said, "My purpose is very simple. Since Gao Xing offended me, I want him to pay the price. Everything that he has done with all his effort, I want to destroy it. And I want to destroy it thoroughly. He has spent so much effort to help Di Wuqing Road to succeed. Hee, how could it be so easy?" Huyan Aobo sneered. "I wonder what it feels like to have your efforts destroyed mercilessly. He will soon have a taste of this feeling." Chu Yang smiled and raised his cup. "I believe he will never forget it." "I also believe it." Huyan Aobo stared at Chu Yang for a long time before she smiled and said, "Not only here, the 3 days, the Gao clan will also have to pay the price." Huyan Aobo cried faintly. She used a very manly gaze filled with murderous intent to look at her hand and the teacup in her hand. She said, "That's my business. I believe you can succeed. I have faith in you." Chu Yang egged her on. "Ha! Great!" Huyan Aobo raised her head and laughed. Her long hair flew and her eyes shone brightly. She suddenly turned her head. "Do you want to drink? You have wine?" "I have good wine." Huyan Aobo laughed. She reached out her hand and took out a huge wine jar. 50 years old Nuer Hong, do you want to drink?" 50 years old Nuer Hong was really an old lady. As the saying goes, women are like wine. "Of course I'll drink." Chu Yang licked his lips. Women are like wine, they are a product of time, a product of the human world, a product of the martial world. But they are not for you men. Huyan Aobo said unceremoniously. "You men are nothing." Chu Yang could only smile bitterly. "After seeing you this time, I will immediately return to the lower 3 heavens. I stayed in the lower 3 heavens longer than the others just to find you." Huyan Aobo drank big bowls of wine and said without lifting her eyelids, "Fortunately, you did not disappoint me. Don't talk to me like a grandmother, I don't like it." Chu Yang also held a big bowl and said with some dissatisfaction, "Your dissatisfaction has nothing to do with me. This Miss Huyan was definitely a different kind of person. She did not mind when she spoke." "Then what does my dissatisfaction have to do with you? What did you say?" Chu Yang retorted. "Humph. Huyan Aobo glared. King of Hell Chu, although you are called the King of Hell in the lower three heavens, I am not afraid of you. Watch me drink you to death today. Let's see who drinks who to death today. Chu Yang sneered and said. But I have to make things clear first. As the saying goes, drunkenness is a mess. Now you and I are sitting here drinking alone. If anything happens later, I'll say it in advance. I won't be responsible. Responsible your head. In your dreams. Huyan Aobo's face turned red as she glared and shouted. Damn. I would rather not be so beautiful. Chu Yang had already drunk 7 or 8 bowls. He was drunk and said with a big tongue. Pity a pretty boy like me. My chastity. My chastity. My chastity. My chastity. My. Get lost. Huyan Aobo could not bear it any more and shouted. Take this. Huyan Aobo took out a stack of paper from her bosom. Lest I forget later. I have written everything on it clearly. Just these? Chu Yang was not drunk at all. He took it with unusual nimbleness. He did not even look at it and stuffed it into his bosom. The stack of paper was silently sent into the tribulation space. Now it was safe. Even if he was dead drunk, he would not lose it. If you use these well. Even if you don't completely defeat Di Wuqing Ro, you can still severely injure him. Huyan Aobo looked at him. These, including the information that Gao Xing brought back himself, the information that I observed and my speculations, are enough. Thank you. I knew you were not drunk. Huyan Aobo said disdainfully. You want to pretend to be drunk to avoid drinking? King of Hell Chu, you are not a man. Whether I am a man or not is easy to prove. There is no need to fight over this. Chu Yang snorted and said. But since you said so. Woman, prepare to go home today. Okay. Come. The two raised their bowls and drank. This Miss Huyan's drinking speed was even faster than Chu Yang's. She picked up the bowl and poured it into her mouth. It was gone with a gulp. Even the corners of her mouth were not wet. Both of them were full of worries. Huyan Aobo even had a vague intention. She wanted to use this drunkenness to say goodbye to the past. From now on, everything that happened in the past has nothing to do with me. Normally, she would not dare to get drunk. But today, King of Hell Chu was definitely a trustworthy person. So she drank without holding back. Picking up the bowl, Chu Yang's drunken eyes slanted. He suddenly laughed and said, Miss Huyan, I suddenly thought of a pair. I would like to ask you to pair it. Pair? Huyan Aobo was already a little drunk. When a daughter drinks red, her face will turn red. Chu Yang laughed. How about it? Huyan Aobo held the bowl and thought for a long time. Finally, she put it down with a bang. She pointed at Chu Yang and scolded. Bastard, speak bastard words, bastard words. Chu Yang fell to the ground and cursed. Motherfucker! Chapter 290. Lotus Lake, the water was calm. A small boat was floating on the surface of the lake, but there was no one on it. Now, Chu Yang was at the bottom of the water. His eyes were wide open as he stood at the bottom of the water. His feet stepped on the slippery mud, and a sword in his hand was slowly unfurling. Practicing his sword underwater. Anyway, he had nothing to do for the time being. He couldn't find the Calamity Sword for the time being, so he might as well try his best to experience the soft power of water here. For the two countries, this was an extremely rare period of peace and tranquility for Chu Yang. Huyan Aobo had left long ago. Chu Yang also checked the things she left behind. Many of them were Di Wuqingro's intelligence network. Many of them were in Iron Cloud's base, and there were also some Iron Cloud's officials and generals. But more of them were Di Wuqingro's strategic deployment and military allocation plans. Every item had Huyan Aobo's personal annotations. The content was very detailed. Chu Yang was speechless. At the first moment, he quickly sent this important piece of information that could affect the war situation between the two countries to Tai Batian. Then, he was free. The sword pierced out with a swoosh. It spun and slashed sideways. Chu Yang stared. He didn't look at the sword, but at the movement of the water when the sword pierced out. He felt the soft resistance coming from the sword. This was a completely different feeling of stagnation. It wasn't appropriate to say that it was binding, because the water didn't deliberately bind. It was the sword that was in the water. The water didn't move, but the sword moved. Although the water wouldn't do it deliberately, it would react naturally. Chu Yang was startled, as if he had thought of something. He couldn't help but be lost in thought. After a long time, he felt that his energy was about to run out. His legs kicked, and he broke away from the mud. He suddenly rushed up to the sky. When he was about to reach the surface of the water, he slowed down and gently exposed his head above the water. The fresh air above the water rushed into his lungs. Chu Yang suddenly felt his mind clear up. After a long period of suffocation under the water, when he suddenly exposed his head, there was a feeling of being born. This feeling was very strange. Chu Yang suddenly felt that if the underwater world was one world, then the surface of the water was another world. This was like the lower three heavens and the upper three heavens. Below the water was the lower three heavens, above the water was the upper three heavens. Chu Yang stepped on the water and came to the shore. Just like that, he sat on the ground with his body dripping wet, deep in thought. But what was the meaning of this? Which aspect of martial arts should he start from? Chu Yang suddenly felt that his mind was filled with inspirations. Not just one, but several. Several inspirations lingered in his mind, but all of them were vague and blurry, and he couldn't grasp any of them. Chu Yang had a feeling that as long as he could grab hold of any one of them, he would be able to break through his current state of mind. This was a rare opportunity. Chu Yang tried his best to empty his mind, and sat quietly on the shore. He hid himself in the withered grass, but at this moment, a feeling arose from his heart. The grass above had already withered, but the grass below was still thriving and green. Moreover, it was already as tall as a palm. What was the meaning behind this flourishing and withering scene? Or what else could it mean? Or was it life? All these inspirations and comprehensions were like flies circling around him, filling his heart. Chu Yang sat cross-legged on the grass, without any signs of life. He had already sunk into a deep state of comprehension. In the space of the calamity sword, the sword's spirit stood in disappointment. He seemed to have felt something, and also seemed to be disappointed. Only he knew what kind of realm Chu Yang was in now. This had already exceeded the scope of comprehension of the second fragment of the calamity sword. It could even be said that it had exceeded the scope of the calamity sword, and had become a completely different realm. This realm belonged to the universe, but not to the heavens. The sword's spirit also didn't expect Chu Yang to have such comprehension. Perhaps, once the master of the calamity sword this time succeeded in his comprehension, his future potential would be far greater than that of the previous masters of the calamity sword. The secret of the calamity sword that had existed for tens of thousands of years. The biggest secret of the calamity sword that no one had been able to solve since its birth. Or, it was very likely, that it would be solved by this young man. This was the first time Chuzhen practiced his sword underwater, and he did it to experience the soft power of water. But what he didn't expect was that the soft power of water was a kind of power of heaven and earth. It even belonged to a kind of domain of the universe. The domain of water. So when his internal circulation couldn't keep up, under the pressure of his extreme desire to breathe, he suddenly touched a little bit of the mystery of heaven and earth. If he only experienced this, it wouldn't be a big deal. But when he rushed out of the water, the sudden awakening gave him the feeling of shattering the void and entering a new world. This was a completely different kind of gap. Naturally, if it was only these two kinds of comprehension, under the guidance of the sword's spirit of the calamity sword, it wouldn't be a big deal. But at this moment, Chu Yang suddenly sensed the profound meaning of life, withering, thriving, and growing. The first understanding of the profound meaning of life's reincarnation and the mystery of heaven and earth made Chu Yang completely fall into a mysterious and chaotic realm. He just stayed there quietly. In this state, he didn't move or breathe. After half a day, his body temperature slowly disappeared. All signs of life on his body seemed to be vanishing and disappearing, returning to silence. Only the dense green grass beneath him was growing wildly in this warm spring weather. In this quiet lake, slowly, there were insects, ants, and flakes. Chu Zhang didn't know anything about this. It was as if he was just sleeping. Iron Cloud Citadel. Tai Butian and Wu Qianqian were sitting in the imperial study of the palace. In front of them was the information sent back by Chu Yang using the invisible falcon. The scope of this intelligence report, the number of people who designed it, the status of the people who designed it, and the unimaginable level of their bases, all of them were extremely shocking. What was even more shocking was that there was a part of the military agreement with the grassland wolves of the northern frontier. Although it was only bits and pieces, combined with what he had encountered during this period of time, no matter how he looked at it, it proved that this information was absolutely true. It was impeccable. But if they were to get rid of all of it, the movement would be too big. This would definitely surpass any of King of Hell Chu's previous purges. Whether it was the military, the government, the merchants, the Confucians, or the major cities, this was the result of Di Wuqingrou's 10 years of hard work. What does your majesty think? Wu Qianqian's black robe covered her body as she said lightly. Her voice was cold as if the secret information in front of her was just a pile of waste paper. She didn't consider that if these forces were to be uprooted, it would implicate no less than 100,000 lives. Minister Chu has gone through untold hardships to obtain this information. This is a great loss for our Tai Chi. But this is a rare opportunity. Tai Butian's eyes emitted a sharp ray of light as he said, "We must get this done once and for all." Wu Qianqian said seriously. "None of these people can be let off." Tai Butian slowly stood up with his hands behind his back. He frowned and paced back and forth in the study. He said in a deep voice, "I would rather kill by mistake than let them off." Wu Qianqian's body shook. "I would rather kill by mistake than let them off." This was a famous saying of Di Wuqingrou. He really didn't expect to hear it from Tai Butian's mouth today. "I only hope that the internal turmoil of Iron Cloud will end here." Tai Butian's slender finger gently tapped on the name list. It passed through the paper and hit the table. "So I will pay any price, no price." Tai Butian's eyes flashed. "Not to mention 100,000 or so, even if it's 1,000,000 or so, I will kill them all." "Yes." Wu Qianqian's body trembled. From this sentence, she could clearly hear Tai Butian's imperial sentiment of slaughtering the world. Heartless! Apart from this, there are also some disobedient people who are listed as important targets in this purge. Tai Butian frowned in pain and finally said it out gloomily. "Your Majesty, this is inappropriate." Wu Qianqian was shocked. The so-called disobedient people were not necessarily spies. They were just people who firmly supported the old emperor, people who supported the old emperor's authority. In other words, people who opposed Tai Butian. What's inappropriate about this? Tai Butian's back was facing Wu Qianqian. He didn't look back. He sneered and said, "There's nothing inappropriate. In this world, there may be a lack of chivalrous men, or peak experts, or honest and upright officials, but there will never be a lack of corrupt scholars. It's these people who still advocate the arts of the saints when the country is in danger. When blood flows like rivers, they still hold the banner of morality high. When the people of the country are in dire straits, they still sing praises. When the soldiers die valiantly in battle, they sing praises for moral integrity at all costs. But when the country is destroyed, they are the first to run out and sell their bodies to the enemy." Tai Butian smiled coldly. "These are corrupt scholars. They never know what the people need. They never know what the soldiers need. They never know what war needs. They only know benevolence, morality, etiquette, and tolerance. They sing praises for those who can bear the humiliation of kneeling down to others to achieve great things. As a result, the country has too many so-called warriors who can bear the humiliation of kneeling down to others. At the same time, There are too few iron-blooded men who stand out bravely in times of war. They always say that when the country is destroyed, it is the time for the country to rise. But they never think of fighting for the country's survival before the country is destroyed. When the country is destroyed, they have already borne the humiliation of kneeling down to others and become the enemy's subjects, in the name of working for the welfare of the people of the country. In an era of prosperity and peace, these people can't be left out. Because they are in charge of government affairs, they can make use of their jealous nature and talent to mediate the government affairs so that one party doesn't dominate the country. There are many uses. But in a time of continuous war, these boneless and pedantic scholars can't be left alive. Chapter 291. Yes. Wu Qianqian's heart was shaken. Tai Butian's words contained a desperate atmosphere. Even an illiterate person would be able to sense the chalkiness of her words. Fight at all costs. Fight to the death. Rather perish together with the enemy than live in cowardice. Don't worry about anything. Tai Butian seemed to have seen through Wu Qianqian's worries. Iron Cloud is huge and there are many talents. If we win, we will have time to slowly clean up the mess, slowly promote talents, and slowly recover in an orderly manner. We won't have to worry about anyone obstructing us. We have a lifetime's worth of time. But if we lose, we don't have to worry about these. Tai Butian smiled strangely and said, Then we'll let Wu Qingru worry about it. So that's how it is. Wu Qianqian suddenly understood. Tai Butian's decision had both victory and defeat in mind. People are full of blind followers. But even if they are blind followers, there needs to be someone of sufficient status to stand up and call for them. Be it for the brave warriors or the fallen slaves of the country. Someone needs to stand up and lead them. Let me give an example that everyone knows. Just like how a member of the party can develop a base, a traitor of the Han dynasty can also establish a puppet government. Outside of the ancient and modern world, there is no other world like this. There is no other way. Tai Butian's move may seem vicious, but it actually cut off the possibility of Wu Qingru conquering the entire Iron Cloud in the shortest time possible in case of failure. The top traitors of the Han dynasty were all dead. The only ones left were those who were still traitors, but they were only in charge of a village or a town. A group of dragons without a leader can't be called a force. From this point of view, Tai Butian was already prepared to perish together with the enemy. She even prepared in advance. Tai Butian's unyielding character was evident. I understand. Wu Qianqian said solemnly. It's good that you understand. Tai Butian looked at her warmly, a gentle smile on her face. She said softly, I'll leave this matter to Minister Chu. You can mobilize all the forces under me. All of them. All the forces under me. Wu Qianqian's body trembled as she replied, I won't disappoint your majesty. Tai Butian nodded and smiled. Great Zhao is also in a state of total chaos right now. Even if Wu Qingru wants to take action, he won't be able to. Therefore, we must end this purge before Great Zhao's internal strife ends. In order to achieve this goal, I will allow you to use slightly more extreme methods. Tai Butian said heavily. Yes. Tai Butian couldn't help but feel relieved. It was the same sentence. Even though he was facing a minister from Butian Pavilion, this minister was completely different from the previous one. If the person she was facing was Chu Yang, Tai Butian definitely wouldn't have dared to say such words. Because there was no need to say anything. Chu Yang had already gone too far. It was extremely extreme. If he were to say it out loud. Tai Butian is really worried that Chu Yang will kill everyone by himself. However, facing Wu Qianqian was a different matter. As for the people hidden by the senior generals in the military, when the time is right, I will need to go to the front lines personally and cooperate with Uncle Wang to completely eliminate them. However, with Butian Pavilion's current strength, dealing with those people is still not enough. Yes. It's all right, Qianqian. Tai Butian said softly. His eyes flashed with an indescribable emotion. He sighed softly. You are not him. Therefore, you don't need to act like him in front of me, or imitate his voice and methods. Your Majesty, please call me Minister Chu, or Minister. Wu Qian took a step back vigilantly. She said coldly, I really like it when your Majesty calls me by my official position and not my name. Tai Butian cried helplessly. You. Are you afraid that I will eat you up? Wu Qian took another step back. Her beautiful face was hidden under the mask. Her expression couldn't be seen. She bowed and said, If your Majesty doesn't have any other instructions, I will take my leave. The moment I leave, Iron Cloud's purge will officially begin. Tai Butian was silent for a while. Finally, he said indifferently, Good. Wu Qian turned and walked out quickly. Tai Butian looked at her back and couldn't help but smile bitterly. This girl. Then he frowned. Ever since he ascended the throne, there had been a constant stream of ministers who wanted him to take concubines and choose an empress. If he hadn't firmly refused, he would have already chosen several concubines by now. But this was unavoidable. What should he do about it? Men should marry when they are of age, and women should marry when they are of age. This was a principle that had never changed since ancient times. There were 3 ways to be unfilial, and having no descendants was the worst. Tai Butian sighed with a headache. His face revealed a look of contemplation. Then, the entire Iron Cloud was completely covered by King of Hell Chu's chalk butcher's knife. The cleansing operation this time was swift. It was almost unprecedented. According to the name list in Wu Qian's hands, they searched one by one. Once they were found, they were immediately subjected to cruel interrogation. Then, specialized personnel followed the vine to the melon, until the trail was completely uprooted. Then, they were immediately beheaded. Without going through a trial or the emperor's approval, they were directly killed. From the top to the bottom, blood gushed out and heads rolled as they slaughtered their way down. In the end, even the executioners who were in charge of the executions became weak. On average, each chalky hand chopped off hundreds of heads every day. These were all living human lives. His Majesty was deep in the palace. He didn't care about anything. Being forced by the ministers, he slowly said, Dear ministers, do you all want to stand on the chopping block and see what it is like? Thus, there was complete silence. Thus, King of Hell Chu became even crazier. It was said that Minister Chu fiercely ordered at Butian Pavilion. Too slow. Did you all not eat? If you don't want to do it, you can change people. Continue to increase the intensity. Investigate to the end. Even if you die of exhaustion, you must investigate. Wu Qian only had one thought. The bigger the commotion in Iron Cloud, the safer Chu Yang would be in Great Zhao. Thus, for the first time, Wu Qian regretted recklessly ordering people to kill. If you kill too many people and fall into hell, then I will. But you must live well. After a few days, Chu Yang quietly woke up by the Lotus Lake. As if he had slept for thousands of years, Chu Yang's eyelids gently blinked and then opened. At this moment, all of the life force was like 100 rivers returning to the sea, pouring into his body at the first moment. Chu Yang didn't sit up immediately. He continued to lie down in his original posture, and carefully sensed this world. This world seemed to be something he didn't recognize. The insects crawling around him, the birds singing softly in the distance, the insects squirming beneath him, all of these sounds were clearly transmitted into his ears. In fact, he could even hear the sound of the grass growing bit by bit. This was the sound of life. The Heavenly Chalk Path Realm. Chapter 292. The reason why the water binds the sword is because the sword destroys the balance of the water. The reason why people always feel bound is because they want to break the shackles of heaven and earth. Therefore, the heavens must bind them. To put it simply, it's the power of the water against the sword. But to put it simply, it's the law of the heavens. The law of the heavens. When people in the water can't take it anymore and break out of the water, it's equivalent to breaking the law of the water. But as long as you're in it, you must be bound by it. Chu Yang quietly comprehended. For half a month, he almost didn't know fatigue as he shuttled between the water and the shore. He didn't know fatigue as he attacked, comprehended, retracted, and comprehended. Time passed bit by bit. In the tribulation space, the sword spirit heaved a deep sigh, but also a sigh of relief. He saw with his own eyes how Chu Yang suddenly fell into an epiphany and was completely bound by it. He almost lost his mind and fell into a deep sleep. In the end, he finally broke through and entered a brand new realm. The reason why the sword spirit said that this was a brand new realm was because even the sword spirit had never seen or comprehended this realm in its infinite life. This realm wasn't necessarily a peak that couldn't be reached, but it was definitely unprecedented. Since ancient times, no one had ever entered this realm. Chu Yang's power didn't increase by much, but his spiritual realm had broken through to a level that even a sword emperor might not be able to reach. The sword spirit smiled with relief. Chu Yang had already broken through the realm of the tribulation sword. Although he still cultivated the tribulation sword technique, he still walked the same path. But he could transcend this path at any time. In other words, no matter how miraculous the tribulation sword was, it couldn't control the current master of the tribulation sword. The master of the tribulation sword was in front, and the master was behind. But now, Chu Yang had really become the master of the tribulation sword. The sovereign tribulation sword. These were two completely different concepts. Chu Yang continued to practice his sword. Sometimes, he even ate and drank underwater. He grabbed a fish and ate it. He tirelessly familiarized himself with this realm, and this new feeling. When others fell into a special spiritual realm, they would be able to transcend it in half a day at most. However, Chu Yang had retained this miraculous state for an entire month. When Chu Yang came out of the water again, he discovered that the Lotus Lake had changed. The surface of the lake was already covered in greenery, and flowers were already blooming on the shore. There was an endless stream of tourists on the shore. They were shuttling back and forth on the lake. There was the sound of zither music, the sound of flute music, and the fragrance of rouge floating with the wind. It was already April. There was only 1.5 months left until the Moon Lotus 3 ultimate gathering. Chu Yang's divine sense moved, and he clearly felt the sword tip and sword edge of the calamity sword in his dantian suddenly jump. Then, in the depths of the Lotus Lake, a sword essence that seemed to have been reunited after a long time suddenly appeared, clear and stable. Chu Yang's eyes lit up. As expected, you appeared. Although he could sense it now, it was still not the time to put it away. Chu Yang could feel that his cultivation was still not enough. Therefore, he could only turn around and leave this place that made him suffer from endless temptation. After I break through, I'll come immediately. Just you wait. The Lotus Lake had become the focus of attention. People from all over the world began to rush over in an endless stream. This was the music festival of the entire Chongtian continent. It was a truly grand event. Countless refined scholars and literary figures were gathered here. Chu Yang was 3 feet under the water. He was like a big fish, silently swimming under the water. The discussion of a ship aroused his interest. He let her stay away from the other ships and quietly hid under this ship. This time, Prime Minister Diwu is really ruthless. So many people died. One of the people on the ship said. Yes, this is a catastrophe for Great Zhao. And it's been a long time, and it's still not over. Another person sighed. After this incident, I'm afraid, we won't be able to recover for 3 to 5 years. Another person said worriedly. That's not necessarily true. The people on the ship obviously had some misgivings. They lowered their voices, fearing that others would hear them. Chu Yang immediately felt relieved. It seems that Diwu Qingro hasn't completely destroyed Great Zhao. From the moment Diwu Qingro made his move, Chu Yang estimated that with such a big incident and the disturbance caused by the sword, Diwu Qingro would not be able to calm down and recover in half a year. Or even longer. In other words, they would be absolutely safe for at least half a year. And now, only 3 months had passed. Even though he knew it wouldn't be so fast, but now that he heard the confirmation of others, Chu Yang was completely relieved. Everything was still in time. Wait until I get the third fragment of the sword, then I can still make it in time. At this moment, a dreamy sound of a flute suddenly sounded. It surrounded the lotus lake that was shrouded in the sadness of spring, adding to the melancholy of a broken heart. Someone suddenly shouted, "The flute master is here." I didn't expect the flute master to come so early this year. There's still 1.5 months before the competition. The flute master is the flute master. She's really extraordinary. But with this flute sound, there's no other sound in the entire lotus lake. Everyone raised their heads and looked over. They saw a flat and long boat slowly sliding down the lotus lake. It was a boat with a black awning. The hull of the boat was pitch black, without any other color. Against the green grass, red flowers, green mountains, and clear water, it was even more abrupt. At the bow of the boat, a person in white robes sat peacefully. A cool breeze blew gently. His snow-white robes fluttered in the wind, fluttering in the wind. The whimpering sound of a flute spread out. The sound wasn't loud, but it silenced all other sounds between heaven and earth. Someone listened attentively with an intoxicated expression. Only when the sound of the flute stopped did he finally wake up as if from a dream. He recited, "The moon and lotus flowers bloom, the meeting of the three absolutes. Who ascends the heavenly palace? Who takes the lead? The flute immortal drifts on the water, the flute sage quietly swims on the boat. The sound of the zither descends from the heavens, the vicissitudes of life paint the spring and autumn. 20 years of wind and rain, who doesn't fall? 20 years of wind and frost, who can stay? The flute master, with only half a tune, has already surpassed the world's music. Worthy of the flute master." The sound of the flute lingered in the air. The flute master's small boat floated down the river. His white robes fluttered as he passed through the vast water surface. But he didn't stop for a moment before disappearing into the vast expanse of smoke. Everyone could clearly see a man in his 30s sitting at the bow of the boat. His eyes seemed tired, emotionless, and helpless. But he also seemed to be weary of the compassion of the world. He was motionless, as if he didn't hear the cheers around him. The silhouette of the boat went far away. Chu Yang peeked out from the water plants to witness this scene. He couldn't help but shake his head and chuckle. This flute master is really pretentious. That motherfucker posture is really cool. But even though it was pretentious, it was still necessary. In a musical competition, popularity was the deciding factor. The flute master appeared alone, dressed in white and on a black boat. His elegant bearing was like a rider leaving dust behind. He floated in and out. The sound of the flute was mellow, directly penetrating one's heart. This scene of gaining the upper hand by a show of strength would surely leave a deep impression on everyone present. In particular, his flute's sound was filled with sorrow. It was exactly in line with the current mood of the people of Great Xiao during this period of turmoil. One couldn't help but admit that this move was really brilliant. The flute master had disappeared for a long time, but the discussions of the crowd were getting more and more heated. In a direction that no one paid attention to, no one discovered that there was an additional fleet of boats here. These boats were no different from other boats. But Chu Yang could clearly see that these boats also came from upstream. They were clearly the boats of the flute master's clan. Chu Yang chuckled. Unknowingly, he chose a secluded place to go ashore. Immediately, he changed his clothes and changed his appearance. He bought a small boat like the one he had bought some time ago. Holding a fishing rod, he sat on it, floating on the water. Who doesn't know how to act pretentious? Chu Yang thought to himself. Suddenly, he fixed the fishing rod on the boat. Pulling off his clothes, he dived into the water with a splash. After swimming underwater for a long time, he finally found a big fish that weighed dozens of pounds. He caught it in a few moves and stuffed the hook into the mouth of the fish. Then, he returned to the boat. Wearing his snow-white clothes, his face was tranquil as he held the fishing rod in his hand. Everyone can understand that fish from before. Actually, Minister Chu didn't know how to fish, but he knew how to catch fish. Therefore, Minister Chu continued to float on the boat like an immortal. His expression was tranquil as he held the fishing rod. The fishing line made whooshing sounds as it was pulled, drifting on the lake. This freehand style was truly a masterpiece of the Lotus Lake. Immediately, many people noticed this extremely pretentious guy. Such a small boat, yet he didn't use a mast, a sail, a paddle, or a bamboo pole. Just like that, whooshing through the water. Immediately, everyone looked over curiously. Suddenly, in front of the boat, where the fishing rod was pointing, the head of a big fish suddenly popped out. With a puff, it made a huge splash. Immediately, everyone could clearly see that the fishing line was in the mouth of the big fish. This fish must weigh at least 100 pounds, right? Immediately after, the big fish moved on the water's surface, creating a ripple. It continued to pull the boat, drifting from east to west. Wow! So cool! A young girl shouted like a love-struck fool. She was so happy that she jumped up and down on the boat, clapping her hands. Her eyes were filled with longing. Using a big fish to pull the boat, wow, wow. More and more people started to notice. Especially some girls. Their eyes were shining as they looked at this pretentious criminal. They were both envious and fascinated. This kind of carefreeness wasn't something an ordinary person could do. So much so that this degree of flashiness was not in the least inferior to the flute master from before. Minister Chu was expressionless. With a proud and aloof face, he was very noble and untainted as he weaved through the cracks of the big boat and the small boat. His facial expression didn't change in the slightest. This was a different kind of scenery. Such elegance, such confidence, and such originality, everyone's eyes were fixed on him. The commotion that the flute master had caused earlier disappeared in an instant. Chapter 293. The man smiled helplessly and embraced his daughter in his arms. How could an ordinary person like him do such a thing? Many young girls ran to the bow of their boats and stretched their bodies out, waiting to see the scene of a big fish pulling a boat. Immediately, the surface of Lotus Lake was filled with jubilation. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Minister Chu circled around all the boats. Even the big fish that was pulling the boat, Liang Ran, was also a flashy guy. It actually jumped out of the water countless times, revealing its beautiful golden body, and then casually fell back into the water, pulling the boat forward. Another one! Another one! Wahahaha! Immediately, waves of cheers rose, wave after wave, and wave after wave. Wave after wave! Especially the screams of a few naive young girls, which rose and fell in succession. The people on the flute master's boat looked at this showy and flashy guy. They were so angry that their noses were crooked. They couldn't wait to dismember this guy into 10,000 pieces. After such an unexpected commotion, the flute master's shocking appearance had become meaningless. The impact it had caused had vanished like smoke in thin air. Could it be that the flute master could make another appearance? Wouldn't that be a joke? The limelight of the entire Lotus Lake was monopolized by Minister Chu. On an ordinary-looking boat, a middle-aged man looked on with a smile and said softly, "Who is this person? He's obviously here to cause trouble for the flute master. Even though he's not on our side, he's completely relieved the pressure on the flute master, eliminating the influence of the flute master. Haha, to us, this is not a bad thing. Could he be one of the zither master's people?" Another person asked. "No, normally the zither wouldn't appear so early," the previous person said with certainty. "That's true. The miss should be arriving soon, right? She should arrive tomorrow or the day after." The first person sighed. "It's just that this year's Lotus Lake is really a bit untimely. Yes, Great Xiao is currently in a state of chaos. If something were to happen here, I'm afraid Du Wuqing Ro will make a move here." Another person said worriedly. "We'll take it one step at a time. Has the clan witness arrived?" "Not yet." On another boat, a young man with smiling eyes looked at Chu Yang, who was drifting left and right. He sighed softly. "Why are you sighing?" I'm sighing. The problem that gave me a headache has been perfectly solved by someone. Difficult problem? Solve it? Not bad. Alu's zither skills had already reached the pinnacle of perfection. No one could compare to her in the heavens. However, Alu didn't like to create momentum. She didn't like to play to the gallery. Therefore, it was foreseeable that she would be at a disadvantage at the start of the three masters' gathering. But the appearance of this person will definitely bring the three ultimates to a completely balanced state. Is it this extremely showy person? The person who asked the question did not believe it. Him? Look at his smug look, he's obviously forgotten himself. You're wrong. This minister you looked at Chu Yang, who was having a great time, and said, the reason why you said that is because you don't know who he is. He is not such a shallow person, but he did it to help us. This is a huge favor. Giving out this favor is equivalent to giving Alu the title of number one in the world. It's extremely heavy. Then, he said decisively, move the boat, invite him. I want to talk to him. Chu Yang was about to end this game. Suddenly, a boat moved in front of him. At the same time, the fishing rod loosened and the fishing line broke. The big fish escaped from his control and disappeared without a trace. The boat's curtain suddenly rolled up. Yes, very suddenly it rolled up. Because Chu Yang saw clearly that this curtain was not touched by anyone's hand, but it rolled up by itself. An expert. Chu Yang's eyes narrowed and he became alert. The curtain opened. A young Tsingy Duke sat quietly on the boat and looked at him. When the two people's eyes touched, Chu Yang immediately felt a strange feeling. This pair of eyes seemed to have existed here since the beginning of time. It had existed for countless years and looked at him for millions of years. If his eyes were a drop of water, then the other person's eyes were the ocean. It completely melted him. Chu Yang's heart shook. He wanted to move away, but he couldn't. It was as if his mind was being controlled by the other person. He froze there. Chu Yang was shocked. How could there be such a terrifying person in the lower three heavens? At this moment the sword spirit in the space of tribulation snorted and a huge amount of spiritual energy was transmitted into Chu Yang's eyes. Pa! Yes, when the two people's eyes were forcefully separated by Chu Yang, there was a clear sound of Pa. This voice was so clear that even the servant behind the green-robed duke could hear it clearly. His eyes were separated from his body and he was able to make a sound. This was an inconceivable thing. Chu Yang's heart thumped wildly. In an instant he only felt cold sweat soaking his clothes. If this young man in front of him wanted to kill him, it would be as easy as killing an ant. This person was unfathomable. Tsingy Duke also made a slight sound of surprise. His eyes flashed with a clear look of doubt. Then he said lightly, "You go out first and go back by yourself." The servant behind him immediately agreed. They were now in the middle of the Lotus Lake. That servant actually jumped out of the cabin without hesitation and fell into the water with a splash. He used his hands and feet to swim to the shore. Only the two people were left sitting opposite each other. "Who are you?" Chu Zhang calmed himself down and asked slowly. "Please come in. Please take a seat." Tsingy Duke smiled kindly and said lightly, "We've met before. We're friends." "Oh?" Chu Zhang looked at him questioningly. Then, he stood up and gently floated into the other party's cabin. Facing such a peerless expert, Chu Yang knew that his opposition was futile. There was no way he could escape. He might as well go in openly and see what he wanted to do. In the cabin, there was a white crystal table. Opposite the man in green, there was a white crystal seat. Chu Yang sat down unceremoniously. White crystal, this kind of treasure that was second only to purple crystal in the heavens continent, was actually used as a table and chair by the man in green. The generosity of this man in green could be imagined. In his dantian, the sword tip let out a low cry of longing. Chu Yang smiled bitterly. "This white crystal is good stuff, but I can't afford to offend him now." "Drink? Or drink tea?" Tsingy Duke smiled kindly. "The guest will follow the host's wishes." Chujiang also smiled warmly. The best. Ha, you're really not polite. Tsingy Duke held the teapot in his hand and waved. The lid of a small water tank on the side of the bed slowly opened automatically. A stream of water rose into the air. As if it had a life of its own, it slowly poured into the teapot. The man in green smiled at Chuyang. This is ice crystal water from the three heavens. Chuyang looked at it with interest and praised. Not bad. But his heart was shocked. How could it be just not bad? In this world, there was only one thing that could use cold ice to gather spiritual energy, then divide it into ice and completely contain it. When it melted, the spiritual energy would completely dissolve in water, ice crystal. Although the quality of the spiritual energy contained in ice crystal was not as good as purple crystal and white crystal, it was the only kind that could be drunk. Chuyang did not expect that the person in front of him would be so extravagant as to use this kind of water to make tea. The man in green smiled and took out a small jade bucket made of purple crystal. He said, This is the tea that I made myself. It's nameless. But I think that only this kind of tea can bear the name nameless. As he spoke, he opened the lid of the purple crystal bucket and carefully poured out a few pieces of tea into the teapot. Then, he placed the teapot flat on his palm. In a moment, white mist suddenly rose and gurgling sounds could be heard. This lake water was actually boiling in his hand. Ordinary tea will not taste good after it's boiled. But this tea of mine needs to be boiled for a while before it can completely dissolve the fragrance of the tea. The man in green explained. Then, he flicked his finger and a stream of water shot out, landing steadily in front of Chuyang. It was filled to the brim, but not a single drop spilled out. A light and elegant fragrance spread out just like that. In an instant, it made one feel relaxed and happy. Although the fragrance of this tea is not strong, it can spread very far. It's also a problem. Tsingy Duke smiled and flicked his sleeves. Chuyang suddenly felt that the entire space had frozen. Even the hot air that was floating out also froze in the air. Domain control. Chuyang almost exclaimed out loud. Domain control was a wonderful technique that only Emperor-level martial artists could comprehend. The wonderful thing about this technique was that some second-grade Emperor-level martial artists could not have a domain, but some first-grade Emperor-level martial artists could. This completely depended on one's perception and luck. It was not based on the depth of one's martial power, but it was a technique that only Emperor-level martial artists could have. Emperor-level martial artists did not necessarily have a domain, but those who had a domain were definitely Emperor-level martial artists. May I ask who you are? Chuyang asked slowly. The other party said that he had seen him before, but he had no impression of him at all. Who was this person? Ha ha! The man in green smiled faintly. Chuyang suddenly felt a sense of familiarity. This kind of familiarity was not the kind of familiarity that he had seen before, but a kind of familiarity that seemed like déjà vu. This person's bearing, temperament, and attitude were all filled with a kind of indifference. Or it could be said that everything in the world did not bother him at all. It was 80% similar to Meng Chao Rant's bearing. I don't have a surname, nor a name. The young man smiled faintly. That kind of free and easy aura that came from his bones floated out like that. But everyone calls me Duke. So you can also call me Duke. Duke. Chu Yang's heart shook violently. He almost lost his mind. So it was him. Chapter 294. Duke. Chu Yang was shocked. So it was this person. This Duke could be said to be the most mysterious person in the three heavens. He was also a top expert. The most powerful expert under the dark bamboo of the three heavens. No name, no surname, no origin. He came and went like a shadow, like a dragon whose head could be seen but whose tail could not be seen. Since this person made his debut, he seemed to have suddenly appeared in this world. No one knew where he came from. It was as if he had suddenly appeared with a powerful cultivation base. No one knew what level his cultivation was at. He could win against a martial great master. He could also win against a revered martial artist. He could also win against a martial king by a little bit. No one knew where the bottom line of his martial arts was. Every battle was fought with ease and ease. Since he suddenly appeared in this world, he had never lost a battle in his life. Dukyu was the leader of the dark forces in the three heavens. To them, the name of Dukyu was synonymous with the devil. Dukyu! Chujiang gasped and said cautiously, "You are from the dark bamboo?" Dukyu's eyes flashed with a surprised light. He said, "You know me?" When he said that they had met before, it was actually him who had met Chu Yang. Chu Yang had not met him before. But now, looking at Chu Yang's tone and expression, it was obvious that he knew him. Dukyu could not help but be curious. "How can I not know an illustrious expert?" Chu Yang said with a smile. "That's right. Your brothers are all dukes of the three heavens." Dukyu immediately thought of this point. "That day, the person who did not appear in Jun Lulu's room was you, right?" Chu Yang smiled and raised his head. He thought of that terrifying aura that day. "You are really good!" Dukyu praised from the bottom of his heart. He looked at Chu Yang with deep eyes. "You actually thought of this with just one sentence. This is not hard to guess." Chu Yang smiled. Then, he picked up the teacup and took a sip. He felt a burst of ice-cold air flowing down his throat. Then, it transformed into a stream of spiritual energy, and fused with his meridians. He felt extremely comfortable. "Duke, you didn't call me here today just to drink tea," he sighed and said. "Although the tea is good tea and the water is good water, the tea is not good." Duke stared at him for a while and said, "This tea is worth drinking." He sighed and said, "Today, I called you here not because you helped Alu at Lotus Lake, nor because you helped Alu comprehend music at the Pavilion of Exceptional Beauties." Chu Yang tilted his head. "Oh? It's because I realize that you always have a certain kind of ability." Dukyu smiled. When he smiled, there was actually a sense of innocence and shyness. This was an expression that should have appeared on a teenager's face, but when it appeared on his face, it actually had some charm. "You're always able to make people unknowingly owe you." "Ha!" Chu Yang laughed. "That's why I want to ask you." Dukyu suddenly stared intently at him and said in a deep voice, "Are you a member of the Yi clan? Or was it someone from the family? Was it someone from the Ling family, the Li family, the Chen family, or the Shao family? Or are they from the Lan clan or the Shi clan?" Dukyu said 8 surnames in a single breath. Chu Yang counted silently in his mind. Suddenly he thought of something and said, "There's still one missing." Dukyu snorted and said, "Because you definitely can't be a member of the Zhuge clan." "So, Diwu Qingro is a member of the Zhuge clan?" Chu Yang's mind was very clear. He immediately asked back, "You?" Dukyu's eyes shone brightly as he stared at him. Then, the light suddenly weakened and returned to normal. He said indifferently, "Answer my question first. I'm not a member of the Yi clan, and I'm also not a member of the family." Chu Yang also repeated the names of the clans and smiled. "My surname is Chu, and my name is Chu Yang. I know you're King of Hell Chu." Dukyu was somewhat helpless. He raised his head and looked at the top of the cabin. It seemed that there was something there that was worth studying. After a long time, he said quietly, "Maybe I guessed wrong." "It seems that you guessed wrong." Chu Yang shook his head and smiled. But in his mind, he quickly memorized the names of the clans. If he guessed correctly, the so-called Yi clan, Chu clan, Ling clan, Li clan, Chen clan, Shao clan, Lan clan, Shi clan, and Zhuge clan should be the big clans that ruled the upper 3 heavens. Chu Yang only knew of the Yi clan because his master's lover was surnamed Yi, Yi Chu Chun. Thinking of this, Chu Yang thought of the man in blue. He suddenly thought, could it be that the Chu clan of the upper 3 heavens is not one of the big clans? Speaking of the man in blue, Chu Yang was somewhat surprised. After the matter at Heaven Reaching Tower, Chu Yang waited for the man in blue to come find him. But for some reason, the man in blue seemed to have suddenly disappeared from this world without a trace. He actually did not come to find Chu Yang. But earlier, he seemed to be in a hurry. Why? Of course, Chu Yan was not worried about him. An emperor-level master was absolutely invincible in the lower three heavens. No one could hurt him. What are you thinking about? Dukyu asked. I'm thinking about the surnames you mentioned, Chu Yang said softly. They are the big clans of the upper three heavens, right? Correct. Dukyu nodded. I won't hide it from you. Actually, I don't know anything about this double heavens continent, Chu Yang said honestly. Today is the first time I've heard of these names. Dukyu looked at him with a strange light in his eyes. I only know about the official records of this double heavens continent. Chu Yang smiled bitterly. I don't know anything about the inside story, the secrets, or the legends. Dukyu's expression became even more strange. I was wondering why there are only upper three heavens, lower three heavens, and upper three heavens since it's called double heavens. Chu Yang asked. In fact, this is only a triple heavens continent. Why is it called double heavens? Dukyu carefully observed each of Chu Yang's expressions. After a long time, he suddenly sighed and laughed self-deprecatingly. It seems that I guessed wrong, Chu Yang was doubtful. So you really don't know anything? Dukyu said heavily, as if he was very angry that he guessed wrong. It's you who made some simple things complicated. Chu Yang laughed. I don't believe that you didn't investigate my information. But you still asked this question. Obviously, you don't believe in my information. It's because you're advancing too fast. Dukyu sighed. If I'm not wrong, you're already a revered level martial artist. Moreover, you're a revered sword artist? Second grade? Chu Yan was shocked. He had already tried his best to hide his cultivation level. Now, he didn't even reveal his aura. But his cultivation level was seen through by Dukyu. Dukyu's eyesight was already frightening. How long has it been? Counting from the time you were born. Even if you're a peerless genius with countless elixirs and a first-class teacher teaching you, it's impossible to reach your current level in the lower three heavens. Dukyu smiled bitterly and said, If you were me and knew how powerful this is, you wouldn't doubt why I'm suspecting you. The corners of Chu Yang's mouth twitched. He was naturally aware of this. His advancement was a legend to everyone. Fine, we owe you twice. Today, I'll tell you the secrets of the Double Heavens continent. Dukyu snorted and said, You can only know the corresponding things when you're at the corresponding level. With your current cultivation level, you know things that are beyond your ability. This is the first time in the Double Heavens continent. Please enlighten me. Chu Yang smiled leisurely. In fact, he was very anxious. What Chu Yang lacked now was history. The real history of the Double Heavens continent. In other words, the level of the real experts of the Double Heavens continent. Only when he knew it would he have the energy to catch up. All day long, they had only heard some vague legends. Who would take those things seriously? This matter. It's really hard to say. Dukyu was absent-minded for a while and said, It's actually a little absurd. Or rather, I don't really want to tell you. I've been caught in a trap of my own making. He sighed. Who would have thought that you would make such a request? This is a symbol of status. You can only know about it when your strength reaches a certain level. Even some people in the upper three heavens don't know about it. The secret of the double heavens only belongs to the big clans of the upper three heavens. Sigh. Chu Yan laughed. This was what he wanted to know the most. So when Dukyu said that he owed him twice, he straightforwardly said, I don't understand the double heavens continent. The fog above my head naturally has to be uncovered. I even thought that you would ask me to assassinate Di Wuqing Ro. Dukyu rubbed his temples. Chu Yang's smile remained unchanged. He was full of patience. Fine, fine. Dukyu smiled helplessly. He said with a hint of indifference. Even if they know that it came from my mouth, what can they do? Humph. These words were full of arrogance. Chu Yang's heart skipped a beat. His eyes were slightly shaken. Could it be that such a secret can't be said casually? If it gets out, will there be serious consequences? Why? The Double Heavens continent. It was originally a continent. There were no upper three heavens, no lower three heavens, and no double heavens. It was just a world. At that time, there were endless disputes. There were humans, beasts, and other races. They all lived and thrived on this continent. Chapter 295. The continent's conflict had reached the point where it would all perish if it wasn't stopped. Therefore, the great experts didn't care if they were friends or foes. They gathered together to discuss a solution. In the end, they came to a decision. That was, to divide the continent into large pieces. There would be areas that were barren and areas that were rich. The term barren and rich referred to the vital energy of heaven and earth. They agreed that each race could only live in their own area. Once they crossed the boundary, they would definitely be attacked by the other great races. And the way to determine which race lived on which continent came from the hands of the great masters. The great masters would have a ranking battle, and the person who ranked first would be able to live in the best place for his race. And so on until the end. The great races at that time were divided into the sun race, moon race, and star race. This is what we often call the three stars divine race. The three stars divine race didn't belong to the human race nor the beast race. It was a special race. They had one thing in common, which was that they could transform into human form when they condensed stars. But their strength was equally strong. There was also the beast race. The beast race was the largest. Moreover, when their cultivation reached a certain level, they could also transform into human form, no different from humans. The bird race, dragon race, fairy race, human race, devil race, and spirit race. Each race had their own unique skills that couldn't be copied. These are the great races. Duke Yu's gaze revealed a strange look. Chu Yan looked at him, but he couldn't understand the meaning behind Duke Yu's gaze. In short, it was very, very strange. Since they are the great races, why are the other races nowhere to be seen? Chu Yan asked. What was the final result of the battle between the great experts? Haha, after the battle in the middle of the East, the strong and the weak were finally ranked. It was also the first ranking battle between the great experts on the continent. Duke Yu shook his head with a smile and said, the final result is, the human race is ranked first, so they occupy the best territory. Next, it is the spirit race, devil race, fairy race, dragon race, bird race, star race, sun race, and moon race. So the continent was separated. At that time, the entire continent was connected by water. Every race was separated by an ocean, so they didn't invade each other. After many years, however, how can the various races not have ambitions? Who wouldn't want to occupy the best? Many years after the disappearance of the great experts, the human race, the strongest race at that time, finally declined, and the continent was once again embroiled in disputes. The Three Stars Divine clan has taken the lead in leaving their own residences. They are preparing to seize the best resources. Once the Three Stars Divine clan took action, the other clans also responded one after another. Thus, the continent was once again thrown into chaos. But this time, there was no great expert to restrict them. But at this time, a person and a sword appeared. Calamity Sword, Duke Yu said heavily. Chu Yang was dumbfounded. Fuck. Why was the Calamity Sword involved? Calamity Sword? Chu Yang's mouth was crooked. What does this have to do with Calamity Sword? Because Calamity Sword was the one who settled the matter. Duke Yu's expression seemed to be smiling, but also seemed to be sighing helplessly. That person was a super bastard. He used an even more fucked up method to settle this matter. Chu Yang was confused and disoriented as he asked, how many years ago was this? This is really hard to calculate. Duke Yu shook his head. At that time, after Calamity Sword's master suddenly appeared, he first found a few experts from the Three Stars Divine clan and beat them up without saying a word. Then, the experts from the various races all suffered a blow without exception. The most serious one was the supreme martial artist of the human race. he felt that the human race was at a disadvantage, so he didn't let it go. He was chased by Calamity Sword's master and slapped all over the heavens. It is said that the slaps were earth-shattering, and a single slap could shatter a mountain. Duke Yu's eyes were filled with fascination. A single slap could shatter a mountain? Chu Yang's eyes almost popped out. What does this slap have to do with a mountain? A single slap on the face, and then this supreme martial artist was slapped onto a mountain. Then, this mountain was gone. Duke Yu raised his eyebrows. It's that simple. Chu Yang almost fainted. There's actually such a slap? But then again, how hard must this supreme martial artist's body be? Then, Calamity Sword's master forcefully gathered all the experts. It is said that the situation was very shocking. Everyone gathered together, but they were still not convinced of each other's strength. Then, Calamity Sword's master said that since this was the case, it was better for everyone to live in their own space. So, he folded the entire continent. Folded the continent. Chu Zhang was completely stunned. Folded? This motherfucking heaven continent is not a piece of paper. How can it be folded? Yes, folded. Then everyone realized that the continent had become smaller. Moreover, it had become a layer like a pagoda. Calamity Sword's master was very satisfied at that time. He said that from then on, this continent would be called Heaven Level. Chu Yang was speechless. So this is how the Heaven Level continent got its name. Then, each race moved into their own space according to Calamity Sword's master's request. No one said that they were unwilling. Duke Yu said. Chu Yang shook his head. Facing such a person. Unwilling? Who dared to say that they were unwilling? However, Calamity Sword's master didn't do it perfectly. Moreover, it caused a huge disaster. Duke Yu sighed and said, Originally it was settled like this. However, the space that he made in a hurry was very unstable. After he finished, it suddenly collapsed. It collapsed. Beads of sweat finally flowed down Chu Yang's forehead. The space collapsed. At that time, the highest level was the human race. Then, it was the 3 Stars Divine Clan. Then, it was the other races. Duke Yu had an indescribable expression. He smiled bitterly and said, The upper level completely collapsed, and the lower level continued to collapse. Therefore, the dragon race, fairy race, devil race, spirit race and so on, who were originally fighting for the continent, disappeared just like that. Were they crushed to death? Chu Yang was shocked. What do you think? Duke Yu rolled his eyes and said, The entire continent fell down just like that. Who could bear it? Even if it was a supreme martial artist, it's really hard to say. Chu Yang's hands and feet were cold. Calamity Sword's master felt that he had no face. Duke Yu's words made Chu Yang's brain completely short-circuit. This guy destroyed 5 races at once, and he actually felt that he had no face? Hearing this sentence made him feel like his balls were cramping. Therefore, he refurbished it and combined the 2 lowest levels into one continent. Then, he combined the 2 levels into one. As for the 5 levels above, he completely combined them. In this way, the heavens became 3 heavens. Then, in order to commemorate the 5 races that disappeared in that disaster, the continent's name was still the heavens. I see. Chu Yang finally understood the origin of this heavens continent. However, thinking about it still made him shudder. There was actually someone who could casually fold the continent. And if he wasn't satisfied with it, he could unfold it and fold it again? This, just thinking about it, made him dizzy. However, there was still a hidden danger. That is, the space collapsed from time to time, Duke Yu said. Therefore, Calamity Sword's master left his sword on this continent. There were a few heaven's eyes. He divided his sword into 2 parts and stuffed them into the heaven's eyes. I don't know what method he used, but the continent stabilized from then on, and there were no more collapses. Then, this Calamity Sword's master disappeared. Since then, no one has seen him again, Duke Yu said deeply. When this man left, he once said, This Calamity Sword appears once every 10,000 years. It locks the fate of the continent, and the cycle of cause and effect is the supporting force of this heaven's continent. Chu Yang's eyes widened, and he nodded in a daze. So that was it. This was the origin of the Calamity Sword. From then on, this strange sword was called Calamity Sword. Everyone was guessing why this eccentric would name this sword Calamity Sword. Could it be that this continent was going to experience another great calamity? But no matter how they thought about it, they couldn't figure it out. So, they could only give up. After the first 10,000 years, someone indeed obtained the Calamity Sword. But that time, the entire heaven structure was completely changed. After a great war, the last remaining bird race was completely annihilated. After a period of time, the Three Stars Divine Clan finally had a great conflict with the humans. But that time, the one who obtained the Calamity Sword was a human expert. Therefore, when the Calamity Sword's master reached his peak, the entire Three Stars Divine Clan was sealed. Sealed, yes, sealed. Only when the Calamity Sword appears can the seal be unsealed. Cough, cough, cough. Chu Yang felt like he was about to break down just from listening. Right now, his heart was filled with doubt. Is this really the case? Is there really such an unbelievable thing? Could it be that the reason why the Calamity Sword kept absorbing the essence of these things was to obtain the supporting force of the continent? If that was the case, wasn't this too big, too big? Every time a fragment of the Calamity Sword appeared, there would be a phenomenon in the world. Was it because the heaven's eye had been taken out, causing the support point to lose its support, resulting in some kind of reaction? Yet another tens of thousands of years have passed. Indeed, the Calamity Sword would appear once every 10,000 years. And every time it appears, there would be a huge calamity. Each time it appears, it would change the entire structure of the heavens. From start to finish, 10,000 years have passed. Duke raised his teacup and took a sip of water. He then said, "Now, the Calamity Sword has appeared again. Not counting the time when the Calamity Sword's master appeared, this is the umpteenth time the Calamity Sword has appeared." Umpteenth time! From the records, the commotion caused by the appearance of the Calamity Sword this time is very different from the previous times. It seems like this time, it's even more serious. And ever since the Calamity Sword appeared, there has been a legend in the heaven realm. When the Calamity Sword appears, the earth will split and the sky will flip. In other words, the entire heaven realm will be destroyed. This kind of nonsense, who knows when it started? Chapter 296. Let's not talk about what you've heard. Even if I'm talking about it, it sounds like I'm talking in my sleep. Dukyu laughed bitterly and said, "But this is the biggest secret of the heaven realm. The root of everything is Calamity Sword. Doesn't this mean that all the secrets are on the Calamity Sword?" Chu Yang frowned and asked. At this moment, he was thinking, damn it, it's just a sword, why is it so complicated? Yes, the Calamity Sword, but it's a pity that you're not its owner. And this generation's Calamity Sword has already been born. The birth of the Calamity Sword means that it has found a person who can complete all of this. You don't have a chance. Dukyu misunderstood his meaning and said slowly with a kind of sarcasm and helplessness. No chance? Chu Yang raised his head and said disappointedly. What a pity. It's really a pity. Dukyu heaved a long sigh. His pity was genuine. This made Chu Yang feel the crisis in his dantian even more. If people knew that the Calamity Sword was in his dantian, Chu Yang dared to bet that even if his cultivation speed was 100 times faster, even if he had 100 lives, he would definitely die miserably in a very short time. Dukyu was in a daze for a while before he finally said, "This is the heaven-level continent." As he said this, Dukyu's finger moved slightly. Then, Chu Yang realized that the tea fragrance that was originally stagnant in the air suddenly resumed its flow and slowly floated out. Did this mean that the conversation was over? The sound of flowing water and the clamor outside seemed to have appeared out of nowhere at this moment, ringing out once more. It turned out that Dukyu's blockade was actually the complete sealing of the entire space. Those outside couldn't hear what was going on inside, and those inside couldn't hear what was going on outside. What kind of magical power is this? Chu Yang's heart skipped a beat and he said, "May I ask, Dukyu, the level of martial artists in this continent, the level of martial artists, is what you saw?" Dukyu lowered his head and chuckled softly. "But, the truly exciting part isn't here. The truly exciting place is not here? Is it the lower three heavens? Is it still the heaven-level continent? Oh? Then, this truly wonderful place, has Dukyu been there before?" Chu Yang asked meaningfully. "It is indeed very fun." Dukyu's eyelids drooped as he said in a deep voice. "It is filled with life and death. It is also filled with opportunities." Chu Yang pondered. Then, he suddenly smiled in his heart. He thought, judging from Dukyu's words, the truly wonderful place he's talking about should be the upper three heavens. "I've already prepared your identity." Dukyu picked up his teacup and took a sip. Suddenly his eyes turned sharp. He reached out his hand and grabbed the air. The tea fragrance that was floating in the air was caught by his hand. He kneaded it like he was kneading mud, forming it into a small ball. Then, he flicked it 3 times with his finger. From the small ball, 3 streams of milky white fog flew out. With a whoosh, they pierced through the cabin and flew out. Plop, plop, plop. 3 sounds of falling into the water came from outside. The current rose and fell, causing the small boat to bob up and down on the surface of the water. In this world, there will always be too many people who overestimate themselves. Dukyu grinned at Chu Yang and said in a low voice, "Ants." Then, he stood up and chuckled. "You're making me so annoyed." At this moment, his smile was suddenly filled with a helpless killing intent. His snow-white teeth bit his lower lip lightly. The white light reflected from his teeth was like a shark in the sea that was devouring its food. Only then did an angry shout come from outside. "Who are the people in the boat? Attacking people in the dark without saying anything. What kind of hero are you? These people should be here to look for you. The trouble you caused by riding on the fish just now." Dukyu ignored the shouts outside and smiled at Chu Yang. "Do you want to do it, or should I?" "I want to do it, but you've already stood up." Chu Yang smiled slyly. "I won't snatch away someone's beloved." Dukyu was stunned. Then, he suddenly laughed. "Sly." Then, he stood up with his hands behind his back and walked out slowly. The cabin was still sealed off from all sides, but Dukyu's figure was suddenly nowhere to be seen. Chu Yang looked at his seat. His eyes flickered. Finally, he stood up, opened the curtains and walked out. His hand grasped the air and solidified it. With a flick of his finger, the enemy was defeated. From beginning to end, it was played down, without the slightest bit of anger. Although this Dukyu's husband had only revealed the tip of the iceberg, he was already ranked first among all the people Chu Yang had seen. He was fully deserving of the title. Only when he came out to take a look did he realize that this small boat had unknowingly been surrounded. 5 boats were anchored in the front, back, left, and right. The bows of the boats were filled with people. On the surface of the water, 3 corpses in blue floated quietly. Presumably, it was Dukyu's 3 flick of his finger. On the opposite boat, a square-faced man with a face full of anger looked at Dukyu and Chu Yang who had just come out. His eyes were fierce. Chu Yang looked at these boats and immediately recognized them. These were the boats of the Flute Master. Presumably, they were here to take revenge for disrupting the Flute Master's plan of gaining the upper hand by a show of strength. "What is the purpose of you blocking my boat?" Dukyu stood at the bow of the boat with his hands behind his back. His green robe fluttered, and his expression was filled with an indescribable air of arrogance. "May I ask this Duke, who was the one who killed these 3 people?" That person was unknowingly intimidated by his imposing manner. Although his tone was unyielding, it had unknowingly changed into an inquiring tone. "It was this Duke." Dukyu didn't even look at him. His pair of eyes seemed to be filled with deep affection as he looked at the undulating water below the boat. He sighed and said guiltily, "I'm sorry, Since Dukyu is apologizing, then, I'm sorry for letting these 3 ugly corpses fall into your clear and pure water. It's really my fault, Dukyu said apologetically. In order to express my apology, I will clean this place up. The caretaker on the opposite boat was so angry that his face turned purple and he was speechless. So Dukyu's apology was actually for the water, and not for the people. This made the person who had wrongly expressed his feelings to explode in anger. You killed 3 of my people, and you actually blamed the corpses for contaminating the water? How can there be such an unreasonable person in this world? Duke, are you the transverse flute master's people? The person endured his anger and clenched his teeth. The sun was beating wildly. You are the flute master's people? Dukyu raised his head and looked sideways. His clear black and white eyes looked at him as he asked softly. His pure eyes seemed to belong to a wealthy family who grew up in a golden palace and didn't know the sorrow of the world. But when that person was looked at by this pair of eyes, he suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. That's right. Just now, this Duke was trying to please the crowd by using a big fish to pull the boat. He ruined my master's appearance. I want to ask about this matter. What is the purpose of this? The square-faced man looked at Chu Yang with his dignified eyes. Your Excellency, you should give us an explanation for your actions. His intuition told him that this Duke in front of him wasn't someone to be trifled with. After acknowledging his identity, he immediately changed his target and opened fire at Chu Yang. At the same time, this also explained to Dukyu, we are looking for him, not you. If you are busy, then go and do what you are supposed to do. This was actually a sign of weakness and begging for mercy. Speak? Speak what? Chu Yang didn't say anything. Dukyu rolled his eyes and asked indifferently. During the meeting of the 3 masters, everyone shows off their abilities. This is a convention, the person said. Convention? What convention? Dukyu frowned and asked coldly. This Duke, even if you are strong in martial arts, it is difficult for 2 fists to fight against 4 hands. You should know that in this world, there are rules and regulations, the person said with a fierce expression. He didn't even know who this young man in front of him was, but he was already afraid in his heart. Difficult for 2 fists to fight against 4 hands? Dukyu said, oh. He slowly raised his hand and pointed at a boat on the left. He said, are you referring to these people? His voice was very soft, and could even be said to be very gentle. But after he finished speaking, the boat he was pointing at suddenly shattered into pieces with a puff. 7 or 8 people on the boat flew into the air at the same time. They disintegrated in the air and fell to the ground with broken limbs and minced meat. There were no screams, and no energy that broke through the air. With just a casual point of his finger, a boat and 7 or 8 people were destroyed. This was simply a monster. On the surface of the water, the biggest pieces of the boat were no bigger than a palm. An indescribable smell of blood spread out on the surface of the lake. Dukyu turned his face to the side and said in a pained voice, it's all my fault, I've polluted another area and… Then, he turned his face and looked at the middle-aged man in front of him with his pure eyes. He smiled amiably and said, is there anything else? Then, he raised his hand and looked at the person in front of him questioningly. His finger pointed at another boat and asked, or… Before he could finish his sentence, a series of exclamations sounded. The sound of people falling into the water was endless. The 7 or 8 people on the boat he was pointing at had already jumped into the water and swam in all directions with all their might. The person in front of him stared blankly. His whole body was trembling. His teeth were fighting fiercely. His 2 legs were like playing a pipa. He was about to kneel down. Do you still want to say it? Dukyu looked at him warmly and said with interest, I can tell you. Believe me, I can definitely tell you. No, 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 no. Dukyu looked like he had a headache. He said, then do you want it or not? It's hard for me to listen to you talk like this, you know. No, 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 don't say it anymore. The man was almost scared to tears. Even his voice had changed as he shouted desperately, Chapter 297. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, yes, I will follow your instructions. The man nodded like a chicken pecking rice. The faces of the people behind him were all pale. They avoided his gaze because they were already scared out of their wits. Yes, in addition. Whether we want to use fish to pull the boat or birds to pull the carriage, this is not something that you, or your master can control. Do you understand? Dooku chuckled. Understood. Dong dong dong. The man replied repeatedly. However, because he was extremely nervous, he said understood instead of dong dong dong. Yes, go. Dooku flicked his sleeves and a strong wind suddenly flew out. The boat opposite them suddenly retreated like an arrow. The people on the boat couldn't stand steadily because they retreated too quickly. They were already scared out of their wits. This time, they couldn't control themselves and fell into the water. In an instant, the boats around them retreated rapidly as if they had seen a ghost. They disappeared in the blink of an eye. This speed might have already set a record on the Lotus Lake. They came aggressively and left scared out of their wits. Dooku smiled and turned around. He spread his hands towards Chu Yang and said, Look, it's settled. Chu Yang shook his head and sighed. This man's solution to the problem was too simple. He was simply bullying people. She slapped him, okay? She slapped him again. Okay? We can't beat him. Who dares to say that it's not okay? Awesome, straightforward. Chu Yang said sincerely. That's how it should be for these people. Dooku smiled lightly. Who has time to talk nonsense with them? Reason? If one slap isn't enough, then another slap. Remember, when it's time to reason, it's always because we're already at a disadvantage. He smiled with his hands behind his back. When you're stronger than your opponent by more than one level, there's no need to reason. If you reason at this time, others will only say that you're a fool. Chu Yang smiled and continued. However, when you're weaker than your opponent, there's also no need to reason. Because that will only give others more pleasure in bullying you. Haha, not bad, not bad. Dooku laughed heartily. If that's the case, wouldn't there be no reason in this world? What's the use of reason? Chu Yang asked. That's why I think that logic is useless. Dooku said calmly. Logic is only applicable to ordinary people. When you reach a certain level, or when you have a certain amount of power, you can trample on reason. You think that reason is useful now because you haven't transcended the scope of ordinary people. Wait until you reach the upper three heavens. Then, you will understand one thing. Dooku smiled mockingly. He smiled for a while before he continued. Sometimes logic is worse than bullshit. Ha! Dooku's body floated up and flashed in the sky. When Chu Yang opened his eyes again, he was already on the shore. We don't owe you anything anymore. If you need your identity, come and find me. You know where I am. The voice was as soft as a mosquito's. Dooku, who was on the shore, had already disappeared. Chu Yang smiled bitterly and shook his head. Only he knew that the other party no longer owed him anything. On the contrary, he owed him something. Dooku might have said some words unintentionally, but when they fell into Chu Yang's ears, it had a completely different effect compared to when other people heard it. Just like the last sentence. Logic in the upper three heavens is worse than bullshit. This sentence made Chu Yang immediately feel that the upper three heavens was a world where the strong preyed on the weak. The story of the upper three heavens was a legend to others. But when Chu Yang heard it, it gave him a special feeling. Until now, he still hadn't recovered from the legend of the Calamity Sword. Shaking his head, Chu Yang sat down on the boat. His fingertips trembled and the sword tip of the Calamity Sword sneakily appeared. As if it felt that there was no one else here except for Chu Yang, it suddenly appeared and landed on the white crystal table. In an instant, the white crystal table and chairs turned into a pile of powder. Even the teapot had disappeared. Then, with a whoosh, the sword tip returned to Chu Yang's body. The moment it returned, a pure spiritual energy of heaven and earth suddenly emerged from Chu Yang's dantian. In an instant, Chu Yang only felt that his whole body was warm and comfortable. It was as if his whole body was suddenly immersed in a hot spring in the middle of winter. After a while, this spiritual energy became more and more lively. Some of the residual medicinal power in Chu Yang's meridians that had been suppressed by the sword spirit was also attracted to it. The strength and spiritual energy converged into a torrent in his meridians and fiercely rushed towards the barrier of second-grade revered sword artist. With a boom, the barrier collapsed and disappeared. Chu Yang only felt that his body was as light as a feather, as if he was about to fly. His whole body was filled with strength. Second-grade revered sword artist. Chu Yang's mind flashed. His body sat still, but a big hole had already appeared under him. The lake water slowly overflowed. Chu Yang's body silently disappeared in the water. Under the water, Chu Yang's body was like a big fish. He stretched his body and shot towards the bottom of the water like an arrow. In his dantian, the sword tip and sword edge simultaneously jumped with joy. At the bottom of the water, the urgent call also became clear. Finally, following this wonderful feeling, Chu Yang reached the bottom of the water. The bottom of the water was originally flat, but here, there seemed to be a big hole under the water. It was dark and deep, and he didn't know how deep it was. Chu Yang didn't hesitate. He summoned a big piece of black steel from the tribulation space, which weighed hundreds of pounds, and held it in his arms. Then, he plunged into it. The buoyancy under the water was getting stronger and stronger. Chu Yang was worried that he would be counterattacked before he could reach the bottom of the water. But with this piece of black steel, he didn't have such worries. His vision was getting darker and darker. After falling for a while, he couldn't even see his own fingers. That wonderful feeling was getting closer and closer. The sword edge and sword tip had already protruded from his fingers, and were making a long clanging sound. Finally, Chu Yang felt that he had sunk nearly 1,000 feet from the bottom of the lake. His 2 feet stepped on a piece of slippery mud. At the same time, a faint ray of light shone from the front, causing the deepest part of the water to suddenly become colorful. It was extremely beautiful, but also extremely strange. Chu Yang opened his eyes wide, and only felt that his heart was beating wildly. He slowly walked towards the source of the light. His feet felt as if he was stepping on cotton. He was holding hundreds of pounds of black steel in his arms, but at this moment, he couldn't feel the weight of the black steel at all. The weight of the black steel and Chu Yang's body had been offset by the buoyancy of the water. As he got closer and closer, the light became more and more condensed. Chu Yang cautiously sensed his surroundings, and walked over step by step. In such a deep place, no one had been here for tens of thousands of years. Who knew what existed here? Chu Yang wouldn't have been surprised if a sword emperor had died here for no reason at all. This underwater world was really full of danger. As he got closer and closer, the light almost directly shone on Chu Yang's face. At this moment, Chu Yang only felt his feet harden. He had actually stepped on a piece of stone. Next to the stone was a silt that was hundreds of feet deep. But right after that, there was a stone ground. After tens of thousands of years, the silt hadn't spread to the stone ground? Chu Yang calmed himself down and took another step forward. He saw it. In front of him, there was a stone wall. In the stone wall, there was a fist-sized pearl inlaid. It emitted a weak milky white light. What a great pearl! Chu Yang praised in his heart. This pearl was definitely not an ordinary item. In the pitch-black depths of the water for tens of thousands of years, it could still shine. If it wasn't a treasure, then what was it? The call that resonated with the sword point of the Calamity Sword was behind this stone wall. It was very clear. Chu Yang took 2 steps forward and was about to examine the stone wall carefully. Suddenly, he felt something strange in the water beside him. It seemed that a small whirlpool had appeared. He suddenly took a step back and turned his head to look. He saw that 5 feet to his left, there was a sudden bright light. It was as if 2 big lights had suddenly appeared. The surroundings were instantly illuminated by this sudden light. Chu Yang turned his head and saw that the top of his head, front, back, left, and right were suddenly filled with strange snakes. These strange snakes were of different sizes. The big ones were as thick as a bucket, and the small ones were only as thick as a finger. But every one of them had a strange triangular head with a strange horn on it. Their eyes were filled with malevolence as they surrounded him. Looking in the direction of the light, Chu Yang almost choked on his water. The light moved slightly at this moment, but Chu Yang saw the true appearance of this light. This was actually the two eyes of a huge snake. These two eyes were as big as Chu Yang's head, and the snake's body was as thick as a house. Looking at its length, it should be more than 200 feet long. Chu Yang sucked in a breath of cold air. What kind of monster is this? While Chu Yang was sizing it up, this huge snake actually twisted its body and slowly slithered over. It silently used its huge body to completely cover the stone wall and the pearl on the stone wall. A pair of eyes looked in Chu Yang's direction with vigilance. Fuck! Chu Yang cursed in his heart. He was so conflicted that he almost wanted to bang his head against the wall. The third fragment of the Calamity Sword was behind this stone wall, but this huge snake was obviously guarding the third fragment of the Calamity Sword. With such a huge monster here with hundreds of millions of its descendants, how could he take it? Damn it, when he came to take the third fragment of the Calamity Sword in his previous life, there was no such monster. And it wasn't at the bottom of the water either. What was going on? One person, many snakes, facing each other, motionless. After a long time, the huge snake seemed to be a little angry at Chu Yang for not leaving. It shook its head. Suddenly, countless strange snakes in front of Chu Yang swung their tails and rushed over like lightning. Chu Yang was shocked. His long sword appeared in the water and waved fiercely. He set up a sword screen in front of him. There was a strange sound. It seemed to be the screams of the snakes that were cut by the sword. The water in front of Chu Yang was suddenly dyed green by a kind of pale green blood. It completely blocked his vision. Fortunately, Chu Yang had been practicing his sword underwater all this time and had gained experience. Otherwise, just this wave of attack would have been enough to teach him a lesson. As the long sword waved rapidly, countless strange snakes were cut down by him. But even more strange snakes rushed over, faster and faster. Chapter 298. Chu Yang only felt a huge force pulling him forward. He almost couldn't stand still. The body parts of the snake in front of him seemed to have encountered a hurricane. They rushed toward the mouth of the huge snake and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Then, Chu Yang felt his arms lighten. The black steel flew out, and entered the mouth of that strange snake with a gulp sound. Without the black steel, his body suddenly became light. He immediately floated up and flew toward the mouth of the snake with the huge suction force. Chu Yang was shocked. He suddenly activated his martial energy. The sword tip of the Calamity Sword appeared on the sword in his hand. He suddenly slashed down. With a poof, the Calamity Sword sank into the head of the strange snake. A gush of blood gushed out, and the world suddenly turned dark. The strange snake felt pain, and suddenly raised its head and roared. Then, Chu Yang felt his head become dizzy, and he floated up. When he opened his eyes, he found that he had left the area of the deep water, and came to an area of blue water. Looking up, he could vaguely see the sky through the water. He was actually almost at the surface of the water. Chu Yang's heart was still beating fast. This snake was really too strong. He calmed down and looked inside. He saw that the Calamity Sword was still in his dantian, but the sword in his hand was lost in the water. With a poof, Chu Yang came out of the water. He took a deep breath. If he didn't have the Calamity Space, he would have suffocated inside. But what was going on? In his previous life, there was no such snake. Why did it appear in this life? Also, this snake seemed to only want to stop him from getting the third fragment of the Calamity Sword. It didn't have much hostility toward him. What did this mean? He had already felt the call of the third fragment of the Calamity Sword. Was it not enough to get the third fragment? Chu Yang smiled wryly. If the requirement to obtain the third fragment was to slay the snake, then even the Sword King might not be able to do it. In his dantian, the sword tip of the Calamity Sword was moving restlessly. If you want to obtain the third fragment of the Calamity Sword, when the time is right, you will be able to obtain it without any danger. This poisonous flood dragon will also not appear. However, if you try to obtain it before the time is right, you will attract the poisonous flood dragon's attention. At that time, you must kill the poisonous flood dragon to obtain the third fragment of the Calamity Sword. In his consciousness, the sword's spirit said slowly, full of schadenfreude. Fuck! Chu Yang angrily barged into the Calamity Sword's space and said, Then why didn't you say so earlier? Bastard, what should I do now? Such a huge snake with the cultivation of a 7th grade spirit beast. I'm only at the revered level, how am I supposed to kill it? That's your business. The sword's spirit said indifferently. Who told you to be so impatient? Chu Yang almost spat out a mouthful of blood. However, the appearance of this spirit beast has a lot to do with you. The sword's spirit saw that Chu Yang was anxious. So, he said slowly, you made it appear. What does it have to do with me? Chu Yang was puzzled. Zhang Xian scratched his head. He really couldn't figure out how such a powerful monster had anything to do with him. Could it be that I want him to appear? Fuck. This is simply nonsense. Chu Yang spat out a mouthful of saliva. He directly snorted at such a statement. It's because of you. The sword's spirit said slowly. Because from the third fragment of the Calamity Sword, you finally embarked on a different path from the previous Calamity Sword masters. And the appearance of this poisonous flood dragon this time is because your path is different. He paused and said, So, you have to defeat it or kill it to get it. Why is it different? Chu Yang asked strangely. I'm still me, and the Calamity Sword is still the Calamity Sword. How is it different? It's because of the sudden enlightenment you had a few days ago. It's beyond the realm that the Calamity Sword should have. The sword spirit didn't know whether he was sighing or feeling helpless or gratified. He said, So, your path is destined to be different. It's also more dangerous. Realm. Chu Yang suddenly recalled the long epiphany he had a few days ago. That works? Chu Yang's mouth was wide open. It should be so. The sword spirit said sympathetically. Your strength still needs to be improved. Then why are you suppressing my strength all the time? King of Hell Chu flew into a rage. This bastard wants me to improve my strength, but he's also suppressing it. Is he playing with me? Or, you can find that person and fight him. Or maybe you can fight many times. You should have some gains. The sword spirit said this and quickly disappeared. That person? Chu Yang scratched his head and thought for a while. Then, he suddenly called out. Dukyu? Asterisk asterisk. You bastard, you should have just told me to kill myself. Chu Yang jumped up. He wanted to cry but had no tears. He couldn't even understand Dukyu's strength. Yet he still wanted to fight him, or even fight several times. He could turn me into ashes if he stretched out his hand. How could I fight him? Chu Yang sighed helplessly. Then, he climbed out of the water and went ashore. He continued to sigh helplessly. Then, he hung his head and walked away. Dukyu was shocked when Chu Yang appeared in front of him. You found me so quickly. Dukyu was startled when he heard Chu Yang's intention. You want to make a breakthrough? So, you want to challenge me? You want to challenge me? Ha ha, you want to challenge me? So what if I challenge you? Chu Yang felt a surge of anger in his heart. Dukyu's attitude made him feel very uncomfortable. Ha ha. Dukyu laughed and rocked back and forth. I've never met a challenger like you. Don't laugh, Chu Yang said angrily. Ha ha, brother Chu, it's not that I'm looking down on you. But you don't have the qualifications to challenge me. Dukyu laughed until his eyes almost disappeared. I'm not afraid to say this. Even your master Meng Chao Ran doesn't have the qualifications to challenge me. Draw your sword! Chu Yang roared. Suddenly, he felt a chill run down his spine. He was so angry that all the pores on his body were about to explode. Duke Yu's contempt for Meng Chao Ran completely enraged Chu Yang, especially when he had said those words. That kind of contempt and disdain had made Chu Yang's blood boil. I don't even need to draw my sword to deal with you. Even if I use only 10% of my strength, you won't be able to stand it. Duke Yu looked at Chu Yang with disdain. He even added oil to the fire. Of course, it's the same for Meng Chao Ran. Chu Yang suddenly felt that the blood in his body was burning. He let himself be angry, and Duke Yu's strong provocation. He even forgot the purpose of his visit. Both of his eyes were completely red. He rushed up almost without thinking. Without saying anything, he unsheathed his long sword and used the move one ray of cold light pierces 10,000 fathoms. He fiercely unsheathed it. Good sword technique. Duke Yu's eyes focused. He rushed up with one hand behind his back and the other hand waved. A tyrannical force surged out. Clang, clang, clang. The continuous sounds of attacks were like the wind blowing on a lotus, or the rain falling on a banana leaf. At this moment Duke Yu did not dodge. He had already been hit hundreds of times. However, he rushed into the sword net without blinking. With a flick of his finger, Chu Yang's long sword flew out. The sword technique is not bad. It's a pity that the person using it is not good enough, Duke Yu said indifferently. However, he was shocked in his heart. This sword technique was not just not bad. It was definitely the best sword technique that he had ever seen. Moreover, it was thousands of times better than the second best. What kind of sword technique was this? If the two of them were of the same level, he would have died no less than 10 times under this sword. Duke Yu did not think of the Calamity Sword. Firstly, in his heart, the Calamity Sword's master would not be so weak. Secondly, the most important point was, the Calamity Sword had not appeared on this continent for 10,000 years. The Calamity Sword had never left anyone alive. Furthermore, it had not appeared for 10,000 years. If Duke Yu could recognize it, then he could only say, I've seen a ghost. Chu Yang let out a shrill cry, and jumped up. The sword flashed in the air, and he caught it in his hand before it fell down. Chu Yang's body had already begun to descend when he caught the sword. But he suddenly rose up again the moment he caught the sword. At the same time, a strong murderous intention condensed into a substance. A sword light came down from above and smashed into the ground like a meteor. It carried with it a tyrannical cruelty that could destroy everything. The second move, so what if I slaughter the world? The sword aura was vast and mighty, and it fell down without any hesitation. The viciousness of this move was beyond the limits of the world's understanding. Under this evil move, the billions of lives in the world could only die. For the first time, Duke Yu felt regret. He regretted that he had only used 10% of his strength against the enemy. This sword was highly condensed from at least 1,000 swords. The power of this sword had far exceeded the power that Chu Yang could unleash by tens of times. If he did not increase his power, then he would definitely be injured by this sword. However, Duke Yu did not change. He said that he would use 10% of his strength. This was his extreme arrogance. After killing the enemy, he brazenly faced it. Facing this destructive move, he stepped forward. Only this time, the wave of his hand turned into a clap. Bang! Chu Yang spat out a mouthful of blood in the air. He somersaulted and fell down. The long sword, from the hilt to the sword blade, shattered into pieces. It turned into streaks of flowing light and disappeared. However, the tip of the sword pierced through Duke Yu's left palm and right hand. Finally, half of the sword tip pierced into his shoulder. It was originally aimed at his heart. However, Duke Yu raised his hands to block it and avoided his heart. Chapter 299. Chu Yang only felt a huge force pulling him forward. He almost couldn't stand still. The body parts of the snake in front of him seemed to have encountered a hurricane. They rushed toward the mouth of the huge snake and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Then, Chu Yang felt his arms lighten. The black steel flew out, and entered the mouth of that strange snake with a gulp sound. Without the black steel, his body suddenly became light. He immediately floated up and flew toward the mouth of the snake with the huge suction force. Chu Yang was shocked. He suddenly activated his martial energy. The sword tip of the calamity sword appeared on the sword in his hand. He suddenly slashed down. With a poof, the calamity sword sank into the strange snake's head. A gush of blood gushed out, and the world suddenly turned dark. The strange snake was in pain, and it suddenly raised its head and roared. Then, Chu Yang felt his head become dizzy, and he floated up. When he opened his eyes, he found that he had left the area of deep water, and arrived at a patch of blue water. Looking up, he could vaguely see the sky through the water's surface. He was actually almost at the surface of the water. Chu Yang's heart was still beating fast. This snake was really too strong. He calmed down and looked inside. He saw that the calamity sword was still in his dantian, but the sword in his hand was lost in the water. With a poof, Chu Yang came out of the water. He took a deep breath. If he didn't have the calamity space, he would have suffocated inside. But what was going on? In his previous life, there was no such snake. Why did it appear in this life? Also, this snake seemed to only want to stop him from getting the third fragment of the calamity sword. It didn't have much hostility toward him. What did this mean? He had already felt the call of the third fragment of the calamity sword. Was it not enough to get the third fragment? Chu Yang smiled wryly. If the requirement to obtain the third fragment was to slay the snake, then even the Sword King might not be able to do it. In his dantian, the sword tip of the calamity sword was moving restlessly. If you want to obtain the third fragment of the calamity sword, when the time is right, you will be able to obtain it without any danger. This poisonous flood dragon will also not appear. However, if you try to obtain it before the time is right, you will attract the poisonous flood dragon's attention. At that time, you must kill the poisonous flood dragon to obtain the third fragment of the calamity sword. In his consciousness, the sword spirit spoke slowly, full of schadenfreude. Fuck! Chu Yang angrily barged into the calamity sword space and said, "Then why didn't you say so earlier? Bastard, what should I do now? Such a huge snake with the cultivation of a 7th grade spirit beast. I'm only at the revered level, how am I supposed to kill it?" "That's your business," the sword spirit said indifferently. "Who told you to be so impatient?" Chu Yang almost spat out a mouthful of blood. "However, the appearance of this spirit beast has a lot to do with you." The sword spirit saw that Chu Yang was anxious. "So," he said slowly, "you made it appear. What does it have to do with me?" Chu Yang was puzzled. Zhang Xian scratched his head. He really couldn't figure out how such a powerful monster had anything to do with him. Could it be that I want him to appear? Fuck. This is simply nonsense. Chu Zhang spat out a mouthful of saliva. He directly snorted at such a statement. "It's because of you," the sword spirit said slowly. "Because from the third fragment of the calamity sword, you finally embarked on a different path from the previous calamity sword masters. And the appearance of this poisonous flood dragon this time is because your path is different." He paused and said, "So, you have to defeat it or kill it to get it. Why is it different?" Chu Yang asked strangely. "I'm still me, and the calamity sword is still the calamity sword. How is it different?" "It's because of the sudden enlightenment you had a few days ago. It's beyond the realm that the calamity sword should have." The sword spirit didn't know whether he was sighing or feeling helpless or gratified. He said, "So, your path is destined to be different. It's also more dangerous." Realm. Chu Yang suddenly recalled the long period of epiphany he had a few days ago. "That works?" Chu Yang's mouth was wide open. "That should be it." The sword spirit said sympathetically, "Your strength still needs to be improved. But you have nothing better to do. Why are you suppressing my strength?" King of Hell Chu flew into a rage. "This bastard wants me to improve my strength, but he's also suppressing it. Isn't he playing with me? Or, you can find that person and fight. Or you can fight many times. You should gain something. The sword spirit said this and quickly disappeared. That person? Chu Yang scratched his head and thought for a while. Then, he suddenly called out. Dukyu? Asterisk asterisk. You bastard, you should have just told me to kill myself. Chu Yang jumped up. He wanted to cry but had no tears. He didn't even understand Dukyu's strength. Yet he still wanted to fight one or several times with him. He could have turned me into ashes with a stretch of his hand. Chu Yang sighed helplessly. Then, he climbed out of the water and went ashore. He continued to sigh helplessly. Then, he hung his head and walked away. Dukyu was shocked when Chu Yang appeared in front of him. You found me so quickly. Dukyu was startled when he heard Chu Yang's intention. You want to make a breakthrough? So, you want to challenge me? You want to challenge me? Haha, you want to challenge me? So what if I challenge you? Chu Yang felt a surge of anger in his heart. Dukyu's attitude made him feel very uncomfortable. Ha! Dukyu laughed. He swayed back and forth. Really, I've never met a challenger like you. Don't laugh, Chu Yang said angrily. Haha, brother Chu, it's not that I'm looking down on you. But you still don't have the qualifications to challenge me. Dukyu laughed until his eyes almost disappeared. I'm not afraid to say this. Even your master Meng Chao Ran doesn't have the qualifications to challenge me. Draw your sword! Chu Yang roared. Suddenly, he felt a chill run down his spine. He was so angry that all the pores on his body were about to explode. Dukyu's contempt for Meng Chao Ran completely enraged Chu Yang, especially when he had said those words. That kind of contempt and disdain had made Chu Yang's blood boil even more. I don't even need to draw my sword to deal with you. Even if I use only 10% of my strength, you won't be able to stand it. Dukyu looked at Chu Yang disdainfully. He even added oil to the fire. Of course, it's the same for dealing with Meng Chao Ran. Chu Yang suddenly felt that all the blood in his body was burning. He let himself be angry, and Dukyu's strong provocation. He even forgot the purpose of his visit. Both of his eyes were completely red. He rushed up almost without thinking. Without saying anything, he unsheathed his long sword and used the move one ray of cold light pierces 10,000 fathoms. He fiercely unsheathed it. Good sword technique. Dukyu's eyes focused. He rushed up with one hand behind his back and the other hand waved. A tyrannical force surged out. Clang, clang, clang. The continuous sound of attacks was like the wind blowing on a lotus, or the rain falling on a banana leaf. At this moment, Dukyu's body had already been attacked hundreds of times. However, he didn't even blink as he rushed into the sword net. With a flick of his finger, Chu Yang's long sword flew out. The sword technique is not bad. It's a pity that the person using it is not good, Dukyu said indifferently. However, he was shocked in his heart. How could this sword technique be just not bad? It was definitely the best sword technique that he had ever seen. Moreover, it was thousands of times better than the second best. What kind of sword technique was this? If the two of them were at the same level, he would have died no less than 10 times under this sword. Dukyu didn't think of the Calamity Sword because, firstly, in his heart, the Calamity Sword's master wouldn't be so weak. Secondly, the most important point was, the Calamity Sword hadn't appeared on this continent for 10,000 years. The Calamity Sword had never left anyone alive. Furthermore, it hadn't appeared for 10,000 years. If Dukyu could recognize it, then he could really say, I've seen a ghost. Chu Yang roared and leaped up. The long sword flashed in the air. Before it fell, it was caught in his hand. The moment he caught the long sword, Chu Yang's body that had already started to fall suddenly rose up again. At the same time, a strong killing intent seemed to have condensed into a substance. A sword light came down from above and smashed into the ground like a meteor. It carried a tyrannical cruelty that could destroy everything. The second move, what harm is there in slaughtering the entire world? The sword momentum was vast and mighty, and it fell down without any hesitation. The viciousness of this move was beyond the scope of the world's understanding. Under this evil, the billions of people in the world could only die. Duke Yu felt regret for the first time. He regretted that he had only used 10% of his strength against the enemy. This sword was highly condensed from at least 1,000 swords. The power of this sword had far exceeded the strength that Chu Yang could unleash by 10 times. If he didn't increase his strength, he would definitely be injured by this sword. However, Duke Yu still didn't change. He said that he would use 10% of his strength. This was his extreme arrogance. After killing the enemy, he brazenly faced it. Facing this destructive move, he stepped forward. Only this time, the wave of his hand turned into a clap. Bang! Chu Yang spat out a mouthful of blood in the air. He somersaulted and fell down. The long sword, from the hilt to the sword blade, shattered into pieces. It turned into streaks of flowing light and disappeared. However, the tip of the sword pierced through Duke Yu's left palm and right hand. Finally, half of the sword tip pierced through his shoulder. It was originally aimed at his heart, but Duke Yu raised his hands to block it and avoided his heart. Chapter 300. Chu Yang clasped his hands behind his back and watched from the side. Chu Yang felt that he understood Duke Yu's mentality better than anyone else. Duke Yu wouldn't have been so angry if it had been a normal day. But today, he was really angry because of Chu Yang. Moreover, he was on the verge of exploding, but had yet to explode. Yin Wu Tian was very lucky to have bumped into Duke Yu's brows at this time. It could be imagined that Yin Wu Tian would be skinned alive even if he didn't die. In fact, Chu Yang felt that Duke Yu would have slapped Yin Wu Tian in the face if Yin Wu Tian had finally admitted defeat and said, "I'm not your fourth master," given Duke Yu's demonic temperament. "Why aren't you?" In short, Duke Wei wouldn't stop until he had crippled Yin Wu Tian today. At this moment, a voice rang out. "Hold on! Show mercy! Have mercy!" It was the first king-level master of the Golden Horse Riders Department, Jing Menghun. Jing Menghun landed with a whoosh sound. He was about to take 2 steps forward when Duke Yu glared at him. Duke Yu's cold eyes locked onto him. Jing Menghun felt as if the sky had collapsed in front of him. A destructive aura enveloped him. He suddenly stopped and didn't dare to take another step forward. He couldn't help but be aghast. How did fourth brother provoke such a terrible person? Even I am far inferior to this person in front of me. What should I do? Duke. Jing Menghun forced a smile. This may be a misunderstanding. Bang. Duke Yu was standing in front of Jing Menghun. He had one foot on Yin Wu Tian's chest, and was motionless. Then, he slapped Yin Wu Tian's tattered face, and insipidly asked, "Are you my fourth master?" The corners of Jing Menghun's eyes twitched. But he didn't dare to move. Considering the strength of this person in front of me, I'm afraid that I'll end up with another person lying on the ground. It'll be useless. Duke, may I ask who you are? Jing Menghun cupped his hands and asked respectfully. Duke Yu turned his head and looked at Jing Menghun with a smile that wasn't a smile. He tilted his head and looked at Jing Menghun for a while. Then, the corners of his mouth slightly curled up and revealed a smile. Are you Jing Menghun? Yes. May I ask the Lord? And you can call me Duke Yu? Duke Yu smiled faintly and said, "This is your brother, right? Your brother said that he's my fourth master, and you're his boss. So are you my first master?" Duke Yu. Jing Menghun's body was covered in cold sweat. In that instant, all the nerves in his body quivered. He was a first-grade king-level expert. So, he had frequently traveled between the lower 3 heavens and the upper 3 heavens. So, how could he not know Duke Yu, who was widely recognized as a first-class devil in the underworld of the upper 3 heavens? For a moment, they didn't know what to do. Her legs felt like jelly, especially when he heard Duke Yu say, "Could it be that you're my grandfather?" Jing Menghun had an impulse to kill Yin Wu Tian on the spot. "My dear fourth brother, even if you call yourself fourth master in front of Prime Minister Diwu, It would still be better than this. Look at what you've done now. I've also become Duke Yu's great master. But, am I worthy of being this great master? No, no, no! Wei Ju! Wei Ju, you've misunderstood. Jing Menghun didn't dare to be negligent. He hastily cleared his name. I wouldn't dare to be so arrogant even if I had the courage of the heavens. Then, he fiercely winked at Yin Wutian. There was no need for Jing Menghun to signal him. Yin Wutian had already heard the words Duke Yu. My mother! How did I provoke this evil star? This guy is famous for being unreasonable. So, you're not my first master? Duke Yu tilted his head thoughtfully. No, no. I wouldn't dare to. Jing Menghun repeatedly cupped his hands. Bang! Yin Wutian's face received a heavy slap. So, you're my fourth master? Yin Wutian suddenly cried. Master Yu, yes. I have eyes but failed to recognize the great mountain. I have offended Master Yu. I deserve to die. Yin Wutian had learned his lesson. Master Yu, please punish me as you see fit. You want me dead or alive? I won't dare to frown. He knew that he would lose his life if he didn't deal with it properly. Even now, it's already been 10 minutes. Bang! Duke Yu slapped him again. I asked you if you were my fourth master. I didn't ask you anything else. Yin Wutian's tears flowed freely. No! I'm not. I'm absolutely not. Bang! Duke Yu angrily said. Motherfucker, why isn't my fourth master? Yin Wutian was tongue-tied. He stared pitifully for a while, and then fainted. Why isn't it your fourth master? When Chu Yang heard this, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. He felt that he was too good at foresight. Jing Menghun immediately noticed Chu Yang's laughter. He didn't dare to neglect him. He hurriedly cupped his hands in greeting. May I ask who this duke is? It's none of my business. You don't need to pay attention to me. Chu Yang was in disguise. So, he naturally wasn't afraid of being seen through. He casually said, I had a fight with Duke Yu a moment ago. He suffered a small loss. So, he was angry when he met the fourth master. Cough, cough. Everything will be fine once his anger subsides. So, don't worry. It would have been better if Chu Yang hadn't mentioned it. Jing Menghun suddenly felt that he was a head shorter than Chu Yang. This guy fought with Duke Yu, and made Duke Yu suffer a small loss. My goodness! Is this guy even fiercer than Duke Yu? On the other side, Duke Yu couldn't help but roll his eyes. I'm really convinced. There's someone in this world who has a thicker face than me. You're bragging too much. You only use 10% of your strength, and you still have the nerve to say that. He couldn't help but slap Yin Wutian's face again. He angrily cursed. This star of misfortune. Everything goes wrong when I meet him. Na Ling, you haven't replied yet. Why aren't you my fourth master? Jing Menghun's whole body trembled. He saw that Yin Wutian couldn't hold on any longer. He rolled his eyes, and hastily took out a red cloth package from his bosom. Then, he enthusiastically stuffed it into King of Hell Chu's arms. This? Duke Yu, please help me. Duke, please put in a few good words for me. My brother looks like he won't be able to hold on any longer. Many thanks, many thanks. If I can escape today, I will never dare to forget Duke's great kindness in this lifetime. Jing Menghun knew that he didn't have any face in front of this devil. So, he had no choice but to use a roundabout way to save the country in a moment of desperation. Duke Yu's voice resounded in Chu Yang's ears like a mosquito's at this moment. Are you counting on me to get rid of an opponent for you? Let me tell you something. That's impossible. I can't kill a king-level expert of the Golden Horse Riders Department. You can take advantage of this situation to fish for some benefits. Can't kill? Chu Yang was startled. You can't kill him. Why are you tormenting him like this? Fuck, I was thinking of saving some effort in the future. He rolled his eyes, and awkwardly said, This? Jing Menghun saw that there was a chance. So, he hastily stuffed the red cloth package into Chu Yang's hands. Then, he bowed with his hands clasped in front of his chest. Please, please. Please accept this. It's just a small token of my sincerity. Sigh. Chu Yang sighed helplessly. The other party was so sincere. If he didn't accept it, he would feel too bad. The infant lifted the red cloth just like that. Immediately, a streak of purple light came out. This purple light was rich and bright. Even Duke Yu turned his head to take a look. It turned out to be a rare purple crystal core. It was as big as a baby's fist. It contained an intense amount of vitality. So much so that the tribulation sword kept tumbling in Xu Yang's dantian. This purple crystal core couldn't be compared to the purple crystal jade essence. However, it was still a rare treasure that was only slightly inferior. To a cultivator, such a large piece could be said to be a priceless treasure, with more than enough to spare. This? Chu Yang weighed the purple crystal core in his hand. He smacked his lips and took a deep breath. Then he hissed, "It's very difficult. You also know that bastard is famous for being difficult to talk to." Jing Menghun understood the meaning behind Chu Yang's words. This guy's heart is very black. Isn't he satisfied with just a purple crystal core? He hastily reached into his bosom and took out a token. Then, he eagerly said, "Sir, I came out in a hurry. This is my identity token. With this token in your hand, even though you are not afraid of trouble, but in this great jiao, it is still somewhat useful. Please accept it." Identity token? Chu Yang's eyes lit up. This is a treasure. I'm in Great Jiao right now. If I have this thing, it will be much more significant than the purple crystal core. Hey, since you're so sincere, I can only accept it. Chu Yang frowned. He reluctantly put the identity token and the purple crystal core into his bosom. Then, he reluctantly sighed. Thank you very much. Jing Menghun's face lit up with joy. Chu Yang took the lead. He smiled and said in a graceful manner, "It's all right. I don't like to take advantage of others. You'll soon know that you won't be paying in vain today." That's right. Jing Menghun repeatedly nodded and opened his mouth. He thought, don't like to take advantage of others? I don't know what kind of reward this expert will give me in the future. He almost laughed out loud as he thought of this. Today is a blessing in disguise. Jing Menghun had never imagined that the reward he would receive from this identity token would be so unforgettable that he would never forget it for the rest of his life. Under a freak combination of factors, the leader of Golden Horse Riders Department and the boss of Butian Pavilion, King of Hell Chu, met for the first time. It was full of drama. The king-level leader of Golden Horse Riders Department shamelessly wanted to give King of Hell Chu a purple crystal core and an identity card. Moreover, King of Hell Chu seemed unwilling to accept it. It was as if accepting it was giving the other party a lot of face. Hey, old Wei, you've already hit and scolded me, Chu Yang said in an old-fashioned manner. Shouldn't you let me go now? After all, I didn't mean it. Chapter 301. You've received a motherfucker's benefit. Moreover, you've received it in such a carefree and happy manner. But you haven't gotten anything in return. Not only have you worked hard, but you've also been angered. Moreover, you still have to release these people. I've already decided to release them. But I can't suffer such a loss, can I? Quickly release them! Chu Yang shouted. Be careful that I won't be polite to you if you don't release them. Duke Yu felt a surge of energy from his dantian. He was so angry that he almost saw stars. He snorted heavily. He didn't want to stay here and look at this vile person's face. He lifted his feet and flew up with a whooshing sound. He then said angrily, Quickly follow me. I'll turn the world upside down with you today. He disappeared with a whooshing sound. He had been angered to the point of leaving. However, Jing Menghun's eyes were very different. This duke had only said a few words. Moreover, he was very impatient and impolite. But Duke Yu, who was hailed as a demon in the entire upper three heavens, didn't even dare to let out a fart. He had left behind some ruthless words. But everyone knew that he had no other choice but to say them. Normally, He would say such words when he couldn't beat someone, awesome person. Jing Menghun looked at Chu Yang in awe. He had already raised Chu Yang's status to an infinitely high level in his heart. If Jing Menghun had been a woman, Chu Yang wouldn't have doubted that he would have given himself to Chu Yang. King-level Master Jing, why aren't you going to see your brother? Chu Yang waved his hand. His bearing was graceful and confident. His face was reserved and alienated. I'm also leaving. We'll meet again if fate allows. At this time, Yin Wutian crawled up from the ground with great difficulty. He couldn't even articulate a word of thanks. Then, he said a few more words of thanks. However, Duke Yu had beaten him too fiercely. So, Chu Yang couldn't clearly hear what he was saying. He nodded and smiled. Minister Chu's figure didn't move. It seemed as if he had been lifted by a strong wind. He went up to the roof with a whoosh sound. Then, he flashed and disappeared without a trace. The dragon's head can be seen, but the tail can't be seen. This is the demeanor of an expert. Jing Menghun had a look of fascination on his face. He murmured in admiration. When can I reach such a level, Sai? He shook his head as he said this. He knew in his heart that this was a hopeless situation. He just hoped that the other party would give him some face or repay him when they met again. This was a great blessing for him. Fourth brother, you're too reckless. AI, how can Duke Yu be provoked by just anyone? Jing Menghun was distressed and angry at the same time. He checked Yin Wutian's injuries. He shook his head as he spoke. Yin Wutian had barely uttered a word when he suddenly spurted out a mouthful of blood. Then, his legs kicked, and he fainted. He had humiliated this fourth king-level expert to a certain extent. He was finally safe now. But he felt that he couldn't do anything about it. A dignified king-level expert was begging miserably in front of his sworn brothers and followers. No one will know. Jing Menghun suddenly stood up. He looked at the two men who were under the restriction for a long time. Then, he sighed and said, I'm sorry. A look of extreme fear flashed in their eyes. But Jing Menghun's palms had already slammed down, on the outskirts. It was a lonely hill. There's no hurry to fight. Let's divide the loot first. Give me the purple crystal core. Minister Chu was stunned as he looked at Duke Yu's outstretched white palm. Duke Yu had reached out his hand to ask for the purple crystal core after they had arrived here. Moreover, he had a bold and righteous appearance. Why should I? Minister Chu was obviously unwilling. This is the fruit of my labor. Of course, he wouldn't give it to him. He had rarely seen such a treasure in the lower three heavens. Now that he had gotten it in his hand and had eaten it, how could he spit it out? Besides, Duke Yu was rich and overbearing. Even his tea set was made of white crystals. Yet he still wanted to snatch the purple crystal core. The fruit of your labor? How can you say that? Duke Yu was amused by the words the fruit of labor. This Duke is the one who has worked, and you've gotten it. Moreover, you've gotten two things. How did you become a miser? I say, Duke Yu, with your status, you still have the nerve to ask me for such a small thing? Chu Yang rolled his eyes. That's a purple crystal core. If it's an ordinary purple crystal, I'll pretend that I didn't see it. But this purple crystal core, you must give it to me. Duke Yu was very determined. All right. Chu Yang quickly compromised. At the same time, he instructed the sword point of the Calamity Sword to suck it quickly. Just leave the shell for me. The sword point of the Calamity Sword couldn't wait any longer. Now that it heard the clear instructions, it somersaulted excitedly, and came to Chu Yang's chest. Then, it silently coiled around the purple crystal core. Suck it! Hurry up! Duke Yu urged. Chu Yang put his hand into his chest and sighed. All right, I can't afford to offend you. I can only submit to your power. But Duke Yu, what do you want this for? Minister Chu didn't take his hand out. It seemed that he was very reluctant to let this guy stall for time. Duke Yu smiled proudly and said, I used a whole purple crystal to carve a purple crystal lotus throne at home. But it lacks a lotus core. This is very imperfect. This piece's shape and size are more or less suitable. Chu Yang nodded and thought in his heart, so you want to play with it. Then, don't blame me for being impolite. Since that's the case, I also want to see that purple crystal lotus throne. Chu Yang finally stretched out his hand. In his palm was the purple crystal core. It was still flickering with purple light. For you. I'm so sad. After all your hard work, it's all for someone else. Haha, this still needs to be carved properly. Dukyu happily took it. Then, he suddenly let out an ah sound, followed by an e sound. It was an unspeakable kind of unexpected sound. Then, he opened the red cloth and raised the purple crystal core high up in the sun. Is there a problem? Chu Yang said worriedly. What's going on? Chu Yang's expression was blank, puzzled, and also curious. It was impeccable. What's going on? Dukyu scratched his head with an empty hand. He was puzzled. His eyes opened wider and wider. He turned the purple crystal core over and over again under the sunlight. This shouldn't be Minister Chu also scratched his head. He said in confusion. What shouldn't be? This is clearly a purple crystal core. But, how can there be no energy inside? Dukyu looked at the purple crystal core that was shining brightly under the sunlight and said, How can such a thing happen? No energy? Minister Chu's expression became even more strange. How can there be no energy? Yes, how can there be no energy? Dukyu was also extremely puzzled. This Duke has seen quite a number of purple crystal cores, but I have never seen such a strange thing. Logically speaking, this purple crystal core should have already turned into powder since there isn't any energy inside. But it's still intact now. As soon as he finished speaking, the purple crystal core suddenly made a popping sound and turned into powder in Dukyu's palm. Dukyu was dumbfounded. His eyeballs almost fell out of their sockets as he looked at the powder in his palm. Ayaya, how did it turn into powder? Chu Yang said in shock. Why did you crush it? Dukyu? So, it was you who extracted the spiritual energy inside on the spot. Chu Yang said. What a pity, what a pity. As he said this, he shook his head, sighed, raised his eyebrows, and squinted his eyes. Bullshit! Dukyu was furious. Do you know that even a monarch-level expert would need at least a day to absorb such a big piece of purple crystal core? Moreover, he knows the fastest way to absorb the energy. Moreover, this energy has to be converted after entering the body's meridians. Do you think I'm a supreme martial artist? Then, what's going on? It was fine in my arms for so long. But it turned into powder in your hands. Chu Yang glared and said righteously. Dukyu, I know you can't bear to part with it. But you're too embarrassed to snatch it from me. So, you decided to create an eternal mystery? This gene is too petty. I've already given it to you. Am I so tasteless? It's not like that. Dukyu was tongue-tied. Looking at this glib-tongued guy in front of him, he couldn't say anything else. Forget it. Don't talk anymore. Let's fight. Chu Yang said dishearteningly. You're the one who contributed the most in this matter. I won't say anything if you want it. It's okay. Don't take it to heart. Bastard! Dukyu almost vomited blood. Please! Chu Yang showed his sword. It's a small matter. Brother, you don't mind it. I won't mind either. Please make your move. Why would I use such a despicable method to obtain this purple crystal core? Dukyu was seething with anger. You with the surname Chu, don't you dare look down on people through the cracks of the door. I didn't say anything. Chu Yan spread out his hands innocently. Why are you so agitated? Seeing his expression, Dukyu became even angrier. I have plenty of this in my house. Do I need to resort to trickery to obtain it? I know that you have a lot of it in your house. Right? Anyway, I can't see it. But I believe you, Chu Yang said lightly. I told you not to talk about it, but you're still talking about it. Really, isn't it just a purple crystal core? I didn't even take it to heart. Look at you, you're so anxious. Dooku really wanted to vomit blood. Now that things had developed to this point, it was no longer a matter of a purple crystal core. This was related to his reputation. When you reach the three heavens in the future, I'll give you 2 purple crystal cores. They're both bigger than this, Dooku said loudly. So that you won't look down on me. I don't want it. 2 purple crystal cores, is too much. Chu Yang frowned. You must have it. I don't want it. If you don't want it, I'll kill all your brothers, Dooku threatened fiercely. This anger almost made him faint. He had to vent it out. Okay then. Minister Chu finally relented under such a strong threat. He seemed to be very sad and indignant as he helplessly said, You can let me see it when you find it. Is that okay? You must have it, Dooku roared. I've never been looked down on in my life. Chapter 302. Let's fight! Dooku panted heavily. He felt as if his chest was about to explode. He had never felt so aggrieved before. However, Dooku was also puzzled. How could such a good purple crystal core not have any energy? Furthermore, it broke the moment I held it in my hands. It wasn't that he didn't suspect that Chu Yang had done something to it. However, when he looked at Chu Yang, he denied it in his heart. It's not that I'm looking down on this guy, but for someone like him to set up such a trap in such a short period of time, he would need at least 500 years of cultivation. Chu Yang naturally wouldn't be polite. He leaped up and shook his hand. A single cold light pierces 10,000 fathoms. Dooku stomped his feet and roared loudly, as if he was venting his anger. Then, he charged forward with a loud roar. Bang! It was as if fireworks had exploded in midair. The ground trembled for a moment. Chu Yang's body flew out like a meteor. He flew diagonally into midair. Dooku only used 10% of his strength. He staggered back 30 to 40 steps as if he was drunk. Chu Yang clearly felt that this move of his was much more powerful than the one that had surged out earlier. He couldn't help but feel refreshed. It was indeed useful. A clear whistling sound was heard in the air. The long sword circled and rolled, and a dragon-like beam of light shone brightly around it. Then, the beam of light suddenly fell down with a powerful momentum. Dooku snorted and punched. 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 There was a loud boom. This time, Dooku's entire body was blown into the air. Chu Yang spun on the ground like a spinning top. He spun continuously for hundreds of rounds. A huge pit that was hundreds of feet deep actually appeared on the ground. Just as Dooku was about to descend from the sky, a bright ray of light suddenly flashed from the bottom of the pit. Following that, an extremely sharp sword light suddenly shot out from the pit. Calamity Sword, Layered Heaven Sword Technique, third move, buried deep unchanging sharp will. Dooku was shocked. He was in midair at this moment, but the opponent was rushing up aggressively. He had no choice but to continuously attack with his palms. In this kind of response, injuring the enemy was secondary. The most important use was to borrow the recoil of the opponent's sword to find a point of impact and leap higher into the air. In this vast and empty sky, a sword light was chasing after a terrifying figure. It was like a maggot in the bones of a corpse. One was up and the other was down, and they both rushed up hundreds of feet into the sky at the same time. A shooting star catching up with the moon, nothing more than this. Both of them were in the sky. A light flashed in Chu Yang's eyes. Then, he swung the long sword above his head. Suddenly, the sword's body emitted a bright light. Then, a woo sound suddenly resounded in the silent sky. At this moment, it was as if a hurricane had suddenly, abruptly, and violently swept up. Immediately after, a glorious crown appeared in the sky. It was dazzling and clearly visible. It was as if an ancient emperor who ruled over all life and death had suddenly descended. In the sky, the wind and clouds suddenly surged. It was as if the clouds were moving in all directions and the wind was destroying everything within 10,000 miles. Everyone was gathering here. Waves of heavenly might burst forth, dignified and solemn. Calamity sword, heaven sword technique, fourth move, gathering wind and clouds as emperor. At this moment, Chu Yang also shouted out loudly. 1. Gather, wind, cloud, is emperor! Dooku suddenly felt goosebumps all over his body. Even though the power of this move had not been fully released, he already knew that he had overestimated himself. He would definitely not be able to take this move with just 10% of his strength. Helpless, he let out a long roar in the sky. Then, his entire body's energy suddenly burst forth violently. At this moment, he had already raised his strength to 2 levels. Dooku was helpless. He had never thought that a mere second-grade revered sword artist would be able to unleash 10 times his original strength under the control of this mysterious sword technique. The sword light was like rain, but it was majestic. It was as if this was the judgment of a king. Slash! 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 Dooku felt a stabbing pain in more than 30 places on his body. In this instant, he had been stabbed so many times by his opponent. Just as he was thinking about this, he felt a sharp pain in his throat. Then, there was a sharp pain in his heart. Then, there was a sharp pain in his back. Fuck! Dooku was so shocked that he cried out in shock. Then, he unleashed an attack that could topple mountains and overturn seas. Boom! Boom! The sword light and the energy continued to clash in the air, exploding and exploding. Chu Yang's body flew far away like a kite with a broken string. This time, it seemed as if he was riding on the clouds. His hands and feet danced as he flew for more than 1,000 feet. Then, he smashed heavily on the ground, and rolled 20 or 30 times. Then, he stopped with his head and face covered in dust. He lay sprawled on the ground, and blood was flowing out from the corners of his mouth. Dooku dodged as he fought. In the end, he used the 1,000-pound fall and the recoil from the explosion to fall into the huge pit that Chu Yang had just created. With a loud boom, a cloud of dust was raised into the air. A few streams of water splashed into the sky. By the time Dooku came out of the hole, there was already a puddle of water below him. He had actually managed to create water out of this pit. This was a mountainous area. As soon as he came out of the pit, Dooku quickly flew towards Chu Yang. He had used 20% of his strength just now. Under such a violent attack, he could not hold back at all. He had to make sure that he did not kill this little brat. When he arrived, he saw Chu Yang lying on the ground with his arms and legs spread out. Dooku was shocked. He had indeed used too much strength. Looking at this guy's pale face, I'm afraid that his internal organs have all been destroyed by me. He could not help but sigh. Just as he was sighing, he saw Chu Yang sitting up with his hands after twitching for a while. Don't move. You're badly injured. Eh? Dooku's eyes widened. He looked at this guy who was just sitting there and immediately started to heal his injuries. After a short while, his face, which was as pale as a sheet of gold, turned deathly pale. Pale. Although it was ugly, it was not the face of a dead person. But why was it so fast? Just as she was wondering, she saw that Chu Yang's face had already turned ashen. Then, a trace of redness appeared. This. What kind of speed is this? Dooku felt dizzy. Even if it was him, he would need at least half a month to recuperate for a few days, and then slowly recover. But this guy actually got better just like that. Chu Yang closed his eyes to heal his injuries. The sword spirit was very busy. The sword point was also very busy. In his dantian, the energy of the purple crystal core that he had just swallowed had just appeared in his dantian. It was suppressed by the sword spirit and completely used the energy accumulated in Chu Yang's meridians to transform it into extremely pure energy, and merged it into his meridians. Chu Yang's injuries were not light. But with the help of such a huge amount of energy, his recovery was extremely fast. Moreover, he had used 4 moves of the Tribulation Sword technique in a row just now. Moreover, he was facing an invincible enemy like Dooku. Under the huge pressure, his understanding of the sword technique became clearer and clearer. some of the invisible barriers that originally existed were gradually fading away. At the very least, Chu Yang could feel that his martial arts were advancing by leaps and bounds right now. Duke Yu's pressure was as majestic as a mountain. It was definitely not something an ordinary expert could compare to. Although he had only used 20% of his strength, that kind of spiritual pressure and the aura of an expert could not be concealed. Under such pressure, Chu Yang continued to use this enormous pressure to compress and explode the energy in his body. He continued to make progress, and continued to make breakthroughs, and continued to gain insights. To Chu Yang, this was definitely a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. After a long while, Duke Yu, who was meditating with his eyes closed, suddenly felt something strange in front of him. When he opened his eyes, he saw that Chu Yang had already stood up. His body was tall and straight like a sword under the setting sun, standing in the wind. The sword in his hand was shining brightly. From Duke Yu's point of view, Chu Yang seemed to have the blue sky above his head and his feet under the setting sun. His clothes and hair fluttered in the wind. Duke Yu suddenly felt that the current Chu Yang was completely different from the previous Chu Yang. This was a very strange feeling. Chu Yang should have achieved another breakthrough in a certain field. Duke Yu's eyes flashed with a complicated light as he looked at Chu Yang. He himself was a peerless genius. He had always been dismissive of the so-called geniuses that were praised by the world. But today, he knew that there were real geniuses in this world. Furthermore, this genius was currently improving at a crazy speed. And this process was facilitated by him. If a brand new legend appears in Fort Continent in the future, then I, Duke Yu, will be part of this legend's promotion. Because I have witnessed the growth of this genius. Come and fight! Chu Yang pointed his sword at Duke Yu. The tip of the sword carried a sparkling light that was like a clear spring. I would like to see how much you can break through in such a short time. Duke Yu snorted coldly. His body floated up as he used the ground shrinking technique to retreat backwards. However, he rushed forward as Duke Yu retreated. Chu Yang only felt that the entire space in front of him seemed to be distorted. Duke Yu had already appeared in front of him. He couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. He roared, "What harm is there in slaughtering the entire world?" He directly attacked. This time, the battle between the two continued for a longer period of time. Chu Yang used the first 4 moves of the Tribulation Sword technique over and over again. Every time he used them, he had a different understanding and experience. When the battle reached its climax, Chu Yang laughed loudly and shouted, "Watch out! Bring it on!" Duke Yu was excited and shouted, "A sword edge that has been famous for all eternity!" Chu Yang shouted. The tip of the sword seemed to have suddenly disappeared. But the sword edge seemed to be the sun in the sky, emitting an extremely bright light. The 4th move was the sword move of the tip of the Calamity Sword. But this move belonged to the sword edge. Calamity Sword Technique, Heaven Sword Technique, 5th move. The sword energy whistled and the sun set on the mountain top. But this sword here emitted a light that was comparable to the noon sun in the sky. Duke Yu shouted softly, "Come!" He pounced forward and didn't try to dodge at all. He faced it head-on. Chi chi chi. Sword energy whistled and sword light flashed. Duke Yu's green clothes constantly made sounds of being torn. But the more he fought, the more excited he became. He roared and attacked without defending. Chapter 303. With a sudden sound, the wind and clouds changed, but they were clearly separated. They turned into 2 torrents and rushed down towards Duke Yu. Calamity Sword, Heaven Sword Technique, Move Number 1. Duke Yu was about to meet the attack head-on, but he suddenly realized that the 2 forces were one hot and one cold, one yin and one yang. They formed a whirlwind that intertwined with each other and came crashing down. There was such a sword technique in the world. Duke Yu was shocked. He gathered his strength and met the attack head-on. A scorching sword wind rushed over. Duke Yu's body felt as if it was on fire. He forcefully broke through, but a bone-chilling cold wind came crashing down. With a loud roar, Du Q counterattacked with all his strength. When Chu Yang used this move, he clearly felt that his martial power was not enough. He could not even use this move completely. His strength was still not enough. His cultivation was not enough. After this exchange, Du Q's clothes had already become that of a beggar's. Only strands of clothes were left hanging on his body. He was in an extremely sorry state. There was even a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. Du Q's 20% strength could be said to be invincible in the lower three heavens, but he was still injured by Chu Yang's sword energy. Of course, if he used a killing move, the situation would be different. But the problem was, he could not. So ruthless! Du Q sat down cross-legged and looked at Chu Yang, who was not far away. He was not worried at all. This guy gave Du Q an illusion. As long as he was not beheaded on the spot, this guy was almost immortal. Sure enough, Chu Yang, who had been lying motionless on the ground, slowly moved. He twitched, and twitched again. Damn it! Du Q closed his eyes. Out of sight, out of mind. He focused on healing his injuries. He did not expect that he would fight with a revered sword artist to such an extent. This was really an anomaly. However, this battle had given Du Q a great deal of inspiration. Especially Chu Yang's marvelous sword technique. Du Q even hoped that Chu Yang would have more of these sword techniques. Chu Yang was using him to practice, but wasn't he also using Chu Yang's pressure to comprehend his own bottleneck? Especially such a godlike technique, it was something that Du Q dreamed of. It was already late at night, and Pain Yam was already jumping up and down, full of vigor. Again! Come! After the fight, both of them felt hungry. They smiled at each other, and then entered the city side by side. Du Q changed his clothes first, and found a small tavern to eat and drink to his heart's content. Both of them were very tired and hungry from the fight. They ate and drank, which made the others look at them with sidelong glances. In the blink of an eye, the table in front of them was filled to the brim. The waiter hurriedly came to clean up the mess, but he heard the two hungry ghosts clamoring. "Give me another basin!" As he shouted, Chu Yang slapped a gold ingot on the table. The shop assistant beamed with delight, and hurriedly went to prepare. "Do we need to pay for our meals?" Du Q gnawed on the meat ribs in big bites as he squinted his eyes. "You're asking me to pay for a slap? Who is a bully like you?" Chu Yang smiled bitterly. She recalled the scene when Du Q went to buy clothes. He actually walked into the clothing store almost completely naked. Then, he took off all his clothes and put them on after taking a piece of clothing from the clothes rack. After putting them on, he walked out without even saying goodbye. The fat boss came out to stop him, but was slapped back by him. Blood flowed out of his mouth and nose. Chu Yang felt inferior to such a scoundrel. After finishing their meal with great difficulty, the two of them touched their round bellies and staggered out of the door. Behind them, whispers could be heard. "I guess these two guys are beggars. They haven't eaten their fill in their whole life. Look at their table manners. No, where would beggars get gold? It's because they are beggars that they picked up a gold ingot today. That's why they came to eat so much. Didn't you see that these two guys looked like they were going to eat their whole life's worth of food today? Yes, curse these two bastards to break their intestines the moment they leave." The waiter looked at the table full of meat ribs and the corner of his mouth twitched. Even a pack of hungry wolves can't eat so much, right? At this time, the battle in the suburbs had already begun. For 10 consecutive days, the two of them were almost inseparable from each other. Chu Yang used the first move over and over again until Du Q couldn't bear it anymore. "Is there anything else? You're so annoying." Chu Yang also felt that he was very familiar with it. So, he tried to use the 7th move, Sun and Moon as Thunder Generals. After a few days of fierce fighting, Chu Yang broke through for the second time in these 10 days of fighting. 4th grade revered sword artist. After a few days of smooth battles, Chu Yang finally succeeded in using the 8th move, splitting the mountain and breaking the high peaks, blood-red sky. During this period of time, the two of them fought more than 10 times a day on average. The sword spirit crazily consumed the remaining medicinal energy. Sword point and sword edge sullenly rolled around in Chu Yang's dantian. Finally, almost all of the medicinal energy was squandered away. Chu Yang had also reached a breakthrough. Moreover, after being suppressed by Dukyu these days, his realm had completely stabilized. Chu Yang was like a piece of steel, and Dukyu was like a big hammer. During this period of time, he had been constantly hammered and tempered. Finally, he had reached the current stage. He was only one step away from obtaining the third fragment of the Tribulation Sword. And this step needed to be done step by step. If the pressure was too great, even a precious jade would be destroyed. The sword spirit had grasped this point very accurately. Therefore, he timely stopped the battle. Chu Yang's meridian still had a very small amount of medicinal energy. The sword spirit didn't want to use it anymore. Those were left for the sake of saving his life in case of an emergency. On the 10th day, after the last battle, a dense aura suddenly came out of Dukyu's body. He suddenly laughed, and raised his hand. A strong suction force came out of his palm. The clouds in the sky suddenly surged crazily. They were pulled over from all directions. It was as if a marshal was gathering his troops. Thousands of soldiers and horses were rushing over from all directions. Breakthrough. Dukyu had also broken through. Dukyu's breakthrough was even more difficult than Chu Yang's. No one knew that he had been stuck at this bottleneck for 3 years. He was so worried that his hair had turned white. He didn't expect that he would gain enlightenment during the battle with a revered sword artist and break through in one go. After the breakthrough, Dukyu let out a long breath. His expression suddenly became very calm. He stood with his hands behind his back. He looked at the clouds in the sky that suddenly came, and then slowly dispersed. His eyes were deep. "Congratulations, you've broken through," Chu Yang said with a smile. "Yes, I've waited for this day for 3 years. Dukyu smiled gently and said, "I should thank you. If it weren't for you, I'm afraid that this bottleneck would continue for a long time. But you should also thank me." Dukyu turned around and looked at Chu Yang with a smile in his eyes. "Although I don't know why you crazily broke through in such a short time, I know that you must have your reasons." "Yes." Chu Yang smiled faintly and said, "No matter what, it's not a bad thing to be a little stronger." "Haha." Dukyu laughed heartily and said, "Can I take the liberty to ask, what's the name of this wondrous sword technique of yours? Where did you learn it from?" As he said this, Dukyu stared at Chu Yang's face. "How is this presumptuous?" Chu Yang chuckled and said, "I met an old man when I was at Beyond the Heavens sect. I was barbecuing meat at that time. I forgot to tell you that I'm very good at barbecuing meat." Chu Yang's eyes revealed an obvious look of reminiscence. "That old man seemed to be very hungry. We ate roasted meat together. Then, before he left, he taught me 8 sword techniques. He also said, if you can learn these sword techniques, they'll be enough for you to move unhindered in the layered heavens." What he said was naturally a real experience. However, it wasn't at Beyond the Heavens sect. In his previous life, he accidentally met an old man in Sunglan battlefront in the 3 heavens. What that old man taught him was naturally not the layered heaven sword technique, but a wonderful mental cultivation method. Dukyu looked at Chu Yang's reminiscing look and finally confirmed that this wasn't a lie. This kind of look couldn't be fabricated. "Moving unhindered in the layered heavens?" Dukyu sighed and said, "If you can reach a higher level, you can even dominate the layered heavens." He looked at Chu Yang enviously and said, "Chu Yang, this is your greatest fortune." "Yes." Chu Yang nodded and asked, "Dukyu, can I ask you, what realm are you at now?" "Me?" Dukyu smiled gently. Slowly, his smile spread all over his face. He said, "My realm. When you can see it, you'll naturally know." Chu Yang thought for a while and nodded. He knew that it wasn't that Dukyu didn't want to tell him, but it wouldn't be good for him to know now. If he told you that the person who was evenly matched with you every day for half a month was actually at a realm that you couldn't imagine, it would be a blow to Chu Yang's current state. Chu Yang asked because he wanted to get rid of his inner demons. Yu didn't answer because he wanted to maintain Chu Yang's clear state of mind. Or it could be said that the question and answer seemed to be useless. But Chu Yang's realm became as firm as a rock at this moment. This was a wonderful situation that could only be understood but not explained. The lotus fragrance is spreading. Yu stood with his hands behind his back and said, Alu should be here too. When he said this name, Chu Yang clearly saw the contradiction in Yu's eyes. The number one in the world this time. Miss Alu should have no problem, Chu Yang said softly. I've never cared about this number one in the world. Yu smiled faintly and said, But women always have to find something to do. Otherwise, wouldn't it be too lonely? Let's go and take a look, Chu Yang suggested. Yu nodded and took the lead. He said in a deep voice, Chu Yang, when you're done with your matters in the lower three heavens, you must come to the lower three heavens in the shortest time possible. The lower three heavens. It's very lively now, including the upper three heavens. Lively? The 3 stars divine clan has appeared, Yu said in a deep voice. This is a very good opportunity for us. When you fight with the 3 stars divine clan, you'll feel that it's completely different from the heavens. It's not just the lower 3 heavens. The upper 3 heavens is facing an even more intense attack from the 3 stars divine clan. All the people outside have already returned, Yu said. This is a fierce battle. But it's also another process of elimination for the heavens. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.